Dorothy and Rachel Leland, welcome to the Tick Boot Camp podcast.
Thank you.
We are so excited to have you folks on the podcast today. Matt and I have been waiting for this interview for a long, long time. And while we were talking offline, we did confess to Rachel that this is a podcast that has been 3 years in the making. And thankfully, Rachel and Dorothy did take some time to recount their journey together in a book that hasn't been published yet. Dorothy, help me out with that. Has it?
Yes. It's out. It's available. It's been out since October.
Well, thank you for doing that, and I'm sorry we're so late in this interview, but the book has now been published, and I have to tell you, folks, I absolutely love this book. From beginning to end, it is just a brilliantly written book. And we here at Tick Boot Camp, define Lyme disease as a family disease. Right? This is not a disease that one person suffers. It's really a community disease. We do describe it as a family disease, because it's not just the person who is dealing with, this terrible disease that it affects, but it also affects the entire family. And I don't think there's a book that has been written that has captured the essence of how this disease affects and impacts an entire family the way this book has. So that's one of my sort of advanced praises for the two of you for the really brilliant book that you've written. So, but before I go off too much, Rachel, why don't you say first say hi to the folks. Right, your mom is a veteran of this podcast, so she'll say hi second, but please say hi to the folks and describe yourself to our community.
Oh my goodness. Hello, I'm Rachel. Boy, describe myself. I'm 32 years old and I live in the Pacific Northwest in Washington. And I am a very excitable, happy person for the most part. I get easily excited, which I can tell, Rich, you and I are going to get along really well. I like your personality. And yeah, I'm just really happy to be here.
So Dorothy, as a veteran of the podcast, you were with us, Matt, what is in probably like the 105th or 6th episode? How many?
120th episode titled Parenting Lyme, actually about Rachel. So it was a little teaser to this, a little preview to this podcast episode today, Rich.
That's right. So if folks want to learn more about Dorothy's perspective and how it's developed, they can listen to that podcast and listen to this. But Dorothy, you're actually now the president of LymeDisease.org. I don't think you were back then, right? So why don't you, again, you're one of the famous people in the community, but why don't you just sort of give a brief introduction to those who may not be aware of who you are?
Well, I got into this world, the Lyme disease world, in 2005, when my daughter Rachel, who was then age 13, became suddenly disabled overnight. And like many other people in this community, we were given wrong answers before we finally found ourselves to right answers. And I found that I was one of many people, our family was one of many families that was really being disserved, ill-served by the medical community when it comes to Lyme disease and related things. And when our family finally got through the worst of our process, I just, felt a compulsion to try to help change the situation. And so I've become involved with the organization LymeDisease.org. And I have done a lot of different kinds of advocacy work through the years with that. And I guess it was about 8 years ago, I co-wrote a book called When Your Child Has Lyme Disease, a Parent Survival Guide. And it sort of took off, it included some of my daughter's story and my family's story, but there was more than that. I was trying to make it more general. And so the current book, I'm drawing a blank. Finding Resilience, a teen's journey through Lyme disease, is based on a journal that my daughter actually kept during this experience when she was 13. And we'll, let her talk more about that. And so we worked on this together. So much of it is her journal, and there's commentary from me sort of filling in some of the blanks and the mother's point of view throughout this.
Well, so let's talk about that, Rachel. Let's talk about how the book was structured, because I really enjoyed the way you structured the book and how I was able to clearly see the difference between when you were speaking about your experience versus the way your mom was speaking about either your experience or her perspective in your experience. So why don't you talk to us about how you structured this book so that we'd have a clear distinction about who was talking at any particular moment?
Yeah, so when I first started writing the book, originally I had thought it was just going to be me, just my book, my story. And so for the first 6 months I worked on it. And then I finally shared it with my mom, and she was saying, this is great, but it's missing some key points here because a 13-year-old only knows so much of what's going on. And so then she was saying, what if we work together and, she can fill in some of those blanks, as we said. And so then we tried that out. And then actually it was working with our publisher was the one who decided how it would actually look. And we were really happy with how it physically looked. It's really easy to tell when it's my mom talking, when it's me talking, just based on the visual changes in the story. So we really liked that. And we fought to make sure that we could kind of go back and forth between me and my mom. Because at one point with our publisher, we were talking about, they were saying, well, maybe just skip every other chapter, have it be your chapter and my mom's chapter. And we were like, no, like we have to be able to go back and forth as we want to tell the story, how it happened.
So Dorothy, I mean, and this is unique. I don't think I've ever read a book that was structured this way. There certainly have been books which are told from different perspectives where we go chapter by chapter, but what we had here was typeface would change, and then of course your comments or your perspective would be written in a shaded box, right? But it did transition really well between one element of this of the narrative versus another. So Dorothy, talk about how that was an important element of this and how it worked so well, or why you think it's worked so well.
Well, it started actually, I'm really proud. My daughter is a very good writer. And so she was writing and she was writing based on things because it was her journal. And also she made a lot of videos at the time and photographs. And so she had a lot of documentation for things as she was going through. And so we kind of worked together. Where would be a good point for me to say something? And like maybe there was something where at one point she had hyperbaric oxygen treatment and she had her experience of what that felt like. But I could give a little bit of background and say, this is what it is. This is how it works. Or at one point she had, IV antibiotics. And so I could explain a little bit of that process. And it wasn't just process. I was also talking about my feelings. And so we really went, it was really an interesting process for us to go back and forth and say, what are we trying to say here? And a lot of, her journal was, what wasn't it?
500 pages.
500 pages to start with. So, I mean, part of writing anything is what do you leave out? You can't tell everything. So we tried to choose things that really represented something. And the one thing I have a little bit of regret about the way she originally wrote it. She would give lyrics of songs that she was listening to. And I thought it really added a lot. And the publishers said, that's really a headache because you have to go and get permission for each of those things. And sometimes you have to pay to use it and everything. And so the decision was made, you can give the title of a song. So she'd say, oh, I was listening to
Boulevard of Broken Dreams by Green Day.
Right, or something. But I think that having the lyrics, really added something. But it was a business decision to not go down that road. But it was it was an interesting process, and I think we learned a lot about each other in the current incarnation by going through that.
I think that's really cool too. And Matt is going to take Rachel through some of the early parts of her journey, and I know Matt's journey included music as well. So I think that's something you two will really be able to connect on. But let me say with a little more background, and then I'll turn it over to Matt for his early questions. So, but this is not just a story about the two of you and your relationship, right? There are other people who are prominently a part of the story. As a dad of daughters, I really loved this, the elements of your dad, Rachel. So first talk to us about Bob and how he was an important part of this story. And I'd like it from each of your perspectives, if you could. Let's talk about, because unfortunately, in many cases, on this podcast, we find dads are not particularly as supportive as we need them to be. In many cases, they're actually not a positive force in dealing.
I'm going to jump in because Rich definitely got glitched out on us with his internet. So I think what Rich was asking there is, can you tell us how he was a positive influence in your experience in contrast to so many negative influence fathers we've seen on this podcast?
Oh, absolutely. So my dad was there every step of the way. My mom and I wrote this book, but my dad was also there while we were writing this book, looking at every chapter as we wrote it on. But he was there through our entire experience. He was at every single medical appointment. Before I got sick, he was at every single soccer game, and that just carried over. So even though we wrote the book and throughout the book, he's mentioned throughout the book, but it's definitely focused on me and my mom. But my dad was there the whole time, and he was so supportive. He also was financially supportive. So while my mom and I were at home, he was out there making money so that we could continue my medical treatment. So yeah, he was very, very much a supportive role and still is to this day.
So, Dorothy, talk to us about how Bob was supportive of you, and why do you think he seems to be unique in this community where dads aren't always as supportive as maybe we would hope they would be in a child's Lyme disease journey?
Well, that's a tough question, because, everybody's circumstances are different. And I certainly have heard of a lot of people where the dads were not supportive, but I also know plenty of cases where the dads were supportive. But the reality is, I remember when I wrote when I co-wrote the book, When Your Child Has Lyme Disease, I co-wrote it with Sandy Barenbaum, who's a therapist, a Lyme literate therapist who specializes in families dealing with Lyme disease. And she said that in her practice, pretty much she was talking to the moms. That was just a reality. Yeah. And that sometimes it would be then, and when it's one of those things where a lot of times, like Rachel says, she remembers her dad being at every medical appointment. He wasn't at every medical appointment because he was at work lots of times. I mean, he came to lots of them.
He came to so many of the important ones.
He came to the big ones, but there were plenty of them where it was not.
I have no memory of that. In my memory, he's everywhere.
And I mean, he was definitely very strong, warm part of our family. But I'm just saying the reality is division of labor. Yeah. I was schlepping you to the appointments. He largely didn't come down, when we were going to the chiropractor all those times.
Oh yeah, not those ones.
Yeah. I mean, it was just the reality she said he was working so we could afford the treatments, but it's so we lucked out, and it was stressful. It was stressful on the whole family. It
is stressful on the whole family, Dorothy, and I appreciate the politically correct answer that you gave, but you're on the Tick Boot Camp, and we're not going to let you get away with that, because the truth is, and I'm saying this as a dad, dads unfortunately are not supportive enough in this community, right? And Matt and I have had the experience, we've had thousands of people reach out to us, and at the earlier stages of our effort here, we would do a Zoom with anyone who would ask us to do a Zoom. We don't have the time to do that anymore, but I can tell you 99% of the people that were reaching out to us were moms. Very rarely did we have ever dad reach out to us, and very rarely did we ever dad participate, even when the mom reached out to us to talk to us, because dads are unfortunately, for whatever reason, and I think some of it may be divide and conquer, which is very polite, but I think part of it is, for whatever reason, is many dads don't have the tools they need in order to be able to deal with the kind of stresses that Lyme disease imposes on a family. And it seems to me that Bob was unique in that regard. So as polite as your answer was, I do think to help other dads, we really have to talk about what was unique about Bob so that they can have a model that maybe they could follow to do a better job and have their children have the kind of memory that Rachel has, which is not that Bob was absent, but she remembers him always being there, even though he couldn't be there because you had this divide and conquer, right? That's not what we see with most of the young people that we're interviewing. So let's talk about Bob a little bit more. And why is he so unique, Rachel? Why was your dad different, and how could he be the model for other dads whose children are on this journey?
So my dad, his job was a finance director at the time. So he was big into numbers and big into data. And so I remember at my absolute sickest, with Lyme, you get symptoms all over the place. They don't make sense. You have one for 3 days, you have another that comes and lasts for 10 years. So my dad made a chart. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And it was like, on this day, this symptom started, and it went for this long, and then this symptom. And so that, in a big way, was how he helped. He worked, we had a medical binder, and he would be making charts and following symptoms and trying to make sense of something that just couldn't really make sense. So that was something, actually, that was unique and helpful. We brought those to appointments.
Yeah. So Dorothy, tell me more about how Bob was supporting you, Dorothy, right? There was no conflict between you. In so many cases, we hear dads are actually giving moms a hard time about coddling their children or enabling their children or, believing what maybe shouldn't be believed. I mean, we've heard that time and time again, Dorothy. So again, I'm going to challenge you. I love you, but I have to challenge you. Tell me why Bob was unique in your element of the story. And you did tell this in the book, right? I mean, you talked about how you had, sort of date lunches when Rachel was, either taking a course, taking a sign language course, or, so fill me in on this and how Bob was always supporting you, Dorothy, and allowing you to be the mom you wanted to be to help your daughter get through this.
Yeah, well, it was, yeah, we should have had him on the podcast with us.
There's no room in this closet. It's very small. You can't see it. Here's the wall and here's the wall. There's no more room.
But it was there were moments, it was not, you write a book and you say certain kinds of things. I mean, there were moments when we all had doubts, the whole family had doubts. And when the medical establishment is telling you that you're wrong, that you're a bad mother and those kinds of things, it was just, he was supportive. He listened to me, and he was willing to, he was willing to let me do, the main part of the work in terms of the research and that kind of thing, but he'd let me fill him in. And as Rachel said, he would do his charts. He's big on charts and graphs. And there were times when there were times when I felt like I couldn't even leave the house, and he would stay there so I could leave the house sometimes, even if it was just to walk around the block. And there were times when, there were some very dark times in with our family through this. And it was important that I felt that he was, I could call him at work. There were times when I called him at work and said, "You have to come home right now." And he would. And it was just, I do know that this is, I've talked to a lot of people over the years that there's marriages that break up, over this kind of thing. Sometimes it's when one of the adults is the one that's sick, but often it's, the ones that I tended to hear, particularly when I was writing the book about, when your child has Lyme disease, that there were marriages that broke up because the child was sick and the people didn't, one parent sided with the IDSA view of things, and, that kind of thing. It was like a very, very, very difficult, very, very difficult for a lot of families. And I feel like we're lucky that we got through it. Now, Rachel's brother, my son Jeremy. What it happened that Rachel got sick just as he was finishing up his last year of high school. And then he went away to college. And it actually, I sometimes, I think I mentioned this in the book. I felt a little bit of guilt over the fact that once he was at college, it was kind of like, okay, good, he's at college, I don't have to think about him, and I could focus on this dumpster fire that was happening in our house. And there were times when I wasn't the parent to him that I would have wanted to be. And so but I know, but I mean, we still all have a good relationship, and I'm aware of families where sometimes the kid that's not the one that's sick sort of divorces the family, just, goes off and says, and it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And so I don't want to make it sound like, oh, we just had it all together,
Oh no,
we were all perfect.
yeah, no, but I do love the way that you wrote Jeremy, Rachel. So let's talk about Jeremy, and how important a role he played on this journey, because I think he was a fantastic brother despite having all of these challenges. And again, every parent feels like they've neglected. When you have more than one child, you feel like you're neglecting someone at some time. That's just the nature of parenting. I have 4 daughters, so I always feel like I'm neglecting someone. But Rachel, talk about how important this, and again, I'm going to bring in the 3 men that we have to introduce to our community before we go through your journey. But so man number 2 is Jeremy. So help us with that, Rachel.
Yeah, so my brother's 4 years older than me. So our entire life, all we did was fight. And then I got sick, and then that kind of shifted. And then all of a sudden I needed him to be able, like, before we got our floors ripped up and made it into laminate flooring so that I could move around our house easier on an office chair. Like, my brother was like physically picking me up and bringing me to the bathroom, and then picking me up and bringing me other places because the wheelchair was really hard to navigate our house. And so our relationship started changing for the better once I got sick. But then very shortly after I got sick, he went off to college. And so then I really only got to see him on holidays and breaks and stuff. But it became really very special when he was home, because it was not just, our sort of the 3 of us at home dealing with all of our problems. We were able to have somebody else there with kind of a different energy in the house. So that was huge. And also, my brother did something that I can never repay him for, was that he taught me how to film and edit videos, which to this day is like my most sacred thing that I do that brings me joy. So he taught me that when things were really, really bad. And then I kept filming and editing videos and documenting my experience up until now.
And I love that, and I can't wait till we build that out a little bit more. But let's hit the pause button on that piece of it now, because I just want to introduce everyone. There's a 3rd man I want to introduce, or I want you to introduce, Rachel, and that there's a man named Brian. So can you talk to us about who he is?
Yes, Brian is my husband. I met him in college, and so he and I have been together now for just over a decade.
So we have 3 important men that played a role in this story, and we're going to build out their role in a little bit more detail. But we had a very supportive dad and husband. We had a very understanding son and brother, and then we have this really important development where you went from being somebody who was really sick and didn't have any social life at all to, as you began to heal, you also were able to heal socially, and you met a boy in college, and ultimately became married to Brian, and he plays an important role in this story as well. So we do have 3 important men, not just me and Matt, who are important in this story, right? So Rachel, Matt's going to now take you through your background with Lyme disease, so that folks can have a foundation for the later elements of our conversation.
Yeah, and before I do that, something you guys said earlier that really stuck out with me was when you start to talk about your journey, right? From the patient side, Rachel, your side, and then the parent side, Dorothy, your side, that you both learn things from each other that you don't remember in the moment, right? So if you could each give us an example of something you learned while writing this book about the journey that you either simply forgot or just didn't even know occurred. So Rachel, could you start with that? I'm just curious to hear some things there.
Yeah, so I learned a lot from like every time, like, because when we were writing the book, and then it was like, oh, my mom was saying like, okay, I'm gonna write a section, and I'm gonna write a section about this, and it's like, okay, and then when she'd write it, and I'd go back in our shared Word document, and I'd see what she'd written, I learned so much. Like, I was so sick and so unaware of anything that wasn't directly affecting me in the moment, and so like my grandma died, and at like the absolute worst time in our family for my health. My mom's mom died, and she had to go and deal with that. And she, like, every time I go back and I read the section where my grandma died, and then my mom is having to go deal with that, but she's having to wait to go deal with that so that she can go to my doctor's appointment. And I mean, like, I cry every time I read that still, because at the time I was, and we talk about in the book, I was just mad at her. And now I'm looking back and I'm like, my mom's mom died, and I was mad at her for some totally unrelated reason because my life was falling apart. And so it's just so interesting to go back. And there were so many moments like that, like where I would just read her thing and just be like, whoa, I had absolutely no idea that she was like a human living a life as well when I was dealing with that.
Yeah, so Dorothy, can you share any experiences that you've learned from Rachel when writing this book as well?
Well, the thing that immediately comes to mind, I sort of don't even want to say, because the idea of being triggering, triggering to people, but there is a section in the book that she is writing about that, where she was actually trying to kill herself by putting air in her PICC line. And I was not aware of that at the time. I did not know that until, 2 years ago or a year ago, whenever it was, we were,
I called you up from a park and I said, I've written a new part of the book and I want to tell you about it before I send it to you, because you're not going to know what I'm talking about.
And it was really, it was a real punch in the gut. And I remember the time, the era, I remember ultimately she was getting her PICC line out. And I mean, I remember everything about that, but I did not know the other situation. And so it's that kind of thing. And so, when somebody, one thing is sort of the power of a journal, something that is written in the moment, is very different than somebody, if you just say, sit down and write something that happened to you a long time ago, you have your memory of it. I did not keep a journal during this time, so she was the one that had the contemporaneous, notes about this. And it was really, as I say, it was a real punch to the solar plexus. And I, we got through it, and we're in a better place.
Yeah, and thank you for being so honest and sharing these things. And it's really important, right? Because although they can be triggering, and although it can be sort of depressing at times to hear these things, Lyme is a really difficult disease. And sometimes people need to know that they're not alone going through this journey. And we at Tick Boot Camp are all about hope. And what better of a story than Rachel's than a story of hope, right? So we're going to get there. And obviously, if you're listening to this podcast and you could hear Rachel, and you can, obviously you can't see her, but we can, she's extremely healthy and she's come full circle. So, we're going to get to that point. But we do want to focus on, Rachel, how bad you were and how your illness began. So if you can start with us, just tell us about when you first got sick, what that was like, and how your symptoms progressed.
Yeah, so I first got sick when I was 13, and I had been a competitive year-round soccer player. And the first symptoms that I had were knee pain. And I'd actually had knee pain for years. So before I was 13, I'd had knee pain pretty much since 4th grade. But it just kind of, it was enough that it was bothersome, but it was not enough to stop me from playing soccer. And then when I was 13, I fell in a soccer game and I sprained my wrist. And that just sort of set off this body-wide cascading of symptoms that we later learned was because the Lyme was waiting and just kind of waiting for its moment to take over. And when I injured my wrist, everything just kind of exploded. So within a couple weeks, I was on crutches and because of knee pain. And then a couple weeks later, I was in a wheelchair because like my knees, my ankles, everything just started hurting, just started having body-wide pain. So, and it just kind of progressed from there.
And at the time, were you thinking it was just simply related to the injury and not looking, for a bigger picture?
At the time, we had no idea what was happening because it did not make any sense because I fell and I only injured my wrist. But my wrist, although it hurt, it was my knees were just like on fire. My ankles were like pins and needles and burning. Like it felt like my ankle was on fire sometimes. And it's just none of it made any sense. We told everyone it was a soccer injury because we didn't know how to put into words what was happening because I went from seemingly so healthy to all of a sudden in a wheelchair, and we didn't know how to express what was going on. And so as we were going to doctors trying to find out what was wrong, we just kind of called it a soccer injury, but it just kept progressing, and we knew it wasn't a soccer injury. We just didn't know what it was.
And Dorothy, what was that like from your standpoint as a mother, knowing that it really couldn't have been related to the injury because it was so much bigger than that? What was going through your head, and what doctors were you seeing to try to get to the bottom of this?
Well, it was, it was very difficult. And at first it's like you go and it's the wrist. And then they say, oh, that's great. We're going to send you to a wrist specialist. And you have to wait 2 months for that appointment. And so there you are. And then, well, then there's this problem with her foot. And then there's a problem with something else. And it was like I went and rented the wheelchair just at a medical supply store because she needed to get from one place to another and she couldn't walk. And it got to a point when we finally got the MRI of the wrist, they said, oh, there's nothing wrong. The MRI didn't show there being anything wrong. And so suddenly, and it's like we were being over dramatic here. This kid doesn't have anything wrong with her. We've got her in a wheelchair and we're, going to, trying to get appointments and whatever. It was very strange. It was a very, very strange situation. And I didn't know, she mentioned that she had had knee pain prior to this happening. And sometimes she would complain about it. And then the next day she'd be out playing soccer. And so it wasn't that I thought that she was lying, but it just sort of seemed like, well, whatever the problem was seemed to have cleared up. And so there was this weirdness. There was just this very weirdness. And one of the things that I later learned just from talking to and learning more about, talking to other patients and, going to medical conferences and stuff, one of the things about Lyme disease is that the symptoms wax and wane and they travel around your body. And one day, one elbow hurts and the next day it's the other elbow that hurts. And, traditional doctors take that as evidence that you're faking it. If, oh yeah, well, yesterday you said the other one hurt. And so, it was a very confusing time. And we were trying to keep her going to school. And so it happened that we just live just very close to the school. And I would push her over there in the wheelchair. And I know it was kind of embarrassing and people to her and people's like, well, what are you, if you had a skiing accident or something, you had a legitimate thing that everybody would recognize. But it was just this, and she looked otherwise healthy. She looked like a healthy girl sitting in a wheelchair. And it was very, I don't know, I felt at the school that they always felt like we were trying to pull something over on them. And that, well, like I said, but I didn't want her going to PE. And well, she can only, she had to go to PE. Well, that'll be interesting. She'll just be sitting there in her wheelchair. Well, we had to have a doctor's note to get her out of PE. We tried to get a doctor's note. And they said, there's no reason why she can't have PE. And I said, well, she's sitting there in a wheelchair. And they said, Well, we didn't tell her go in a wheelchair. You're the ones that did that. And it was just it was just very weird. It was just very weird. And once, as I said, once we got the MRI of the wrist and it didn't show anything wrong, it was like the medical people's attitude towards us changed. And so we had to keep pushing and go other directions.
So you're being judged by doctors, by teachers, by your peers, fellow students, Rachel, right? Now you're 13 years old. That's a really important time in life. How is this impacting you as a, this preteen at this point, or this teen, I should say?
Yeah, well, it was very uncomfortable at school because I really, and to this day, I mean, I don't know anybody who doesn't want to have like a good label to say exactly what's going on. It feels so good when you're like, I can put a word to what's happening. And so I didn't have that. And so it just felt very uncomfortable. And I just found that I started kind of shifting how I would react. And like, normally I'm very outgoing and I'll talk to anybody. And I just, I love to be around people and do stuff. But at school, like when I'd be pushed in the hallway, I'd start to like have my eyes just be down, just like, don't look at me, because if you look at me, you're going to ask me a question that I don't know how to answer. And I can't give you an answer that's going to make you happy. And so school became hard. And we talk in the book about, there's a girl that was like began bullying me just because I was in a wheelchair. And so a lot of kids just really didn't know how to react to what was going on. And I didn't know at the time how to do anything. I didn't know what to say. And so that was a problem at school. Thankfully, I had a fantastic group of friends that were all in my neighborhood that I'm still very good friends with to this day. And so all of those friends they were all completely supportive and, did not do anything weird like the people at school. They were all by my side throughout the entire experience. So I was extremely lucky for that. But at school, it was very uncomfortable. And yeah.
So Dorothy, as the mom, I know you're not going to let this go. Knowing you certainly would not let this go. So what are you doing next? You're being turned away by all these doctors, basically saying you're the one you're the reason she's in a real wheelchair. She's fine. Have her walk and just stop it, right? Now, obviously, she's not fine. So what do you do next? Are you looking for other doctors, or are you starting to pivot to alternative medicine because you're not getting what you need and should be getting from mainstream doctors?
Well, I wish we had pivoted sooner. We were still thinking, we just need to get to the right doctor, the right this and that. She ended up being at a famous children's hospital, which shall not be named. And we were taking her there because they had this famous pediatric pain program. But what we didn't appreciate until we were in the thick of it is that they were viewing it all as psychological. And it was there was a lot of trauma that was associated with that as well. And so it wasn't until we left that, and they basically these experts basically told me, that it was if I can intersperse something here, at some point somebody had said to us, you think it could possibly be Lyme disease. And I didn't know anything about Lyme disease. We live in California. There's still not a real high level of awareness about Lyme disease in California, even though there's plenty of Lyme disease here. But somebody said, could it be Lyme disease? Well, I'll ask the doctor. And the doctor almost threw us out of the office when I asked that. I mean, it was very strange. And I was just like, you could have said, could this possibly be dengue fever? I mean, I don't know. I was just asking. And it was just like, just asked a question, and I did not realize what a nerve you touch with, certain members of the medical community when you mention Lyme disease. And so I started looking for that, online, and there were virtually no books on Amazon that were, for anything that would be helpful. And there just wasn't a lot. Even this was 2005. There's just been an explosion of information on the internet. And so, Facebook didn't exist, and Instagram and Twitter, none of that stuff existed. But now there's a lot of information, not all of it true, on Lyme disease on the internet. But there really wasn't much of anything. And so we insisted on the guy that threw us out of the office didn't want to order the Lyme test. We got somebody else to order the Lyme test, and it came back negative. And so it was like, oh, she doesn't have Lyme disease. Well, we didn't know about all of the issues related to Lyme testing. And so when we were at this hospital that shall not be named, they at one point they had they had one in a computer that families could use. It was like a little corner library, and there was one little computer thing. And when she was doing her various sessions and stuff, I'd go in there and I'd Google things about pediatric pain and other kinds of stuff. And I kept coming up with stuff, some stuff about Lyme disease. Some of it seemed to apply, others didn't seem to apply. And so I asked them about it, and they said, oh, well, she doesn't have Lyme disease. And because she had had this negative test. And so I had learned enough then to know that there was something called a Western blot, but I hadn't learned enough to know that different labs get different results for Western blots. And so I said, well, could we have a Western blot? And they were just like, no, there's no reason for her to have that, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, somehow I think they just wanted to shut me up. They ordered it, and it came back that she didn't have it. And so again, I didn't know the stuff about, there's a lot of stuff about, Western blots that you, they come in different flavors.
Absolutely.
And so I sort of just disregarded that, and I was looking for other things. And it wasn't until they dismissed us from the hospital and just said, go back and, go to your home and do your, we don't want anything more to do with you. That I was really like, well, what do we do now? And that was the point when I thought, we've got to start looking at somebody, that looks at this. We have to start looking through different eyes. And so I went, there was somebody in our town that did acupuncture and other kinds of alternative things. And I went and talked to him myself. And then he said, well, bring her in. And he was very nice. And then he asked her some things, and then he turned to me and he said, I think she has Lyme disease. And I said, well, all of these people, the one thing that they were sure of is she didn't have Lyme disease. And he goes, I think she has Lyme disease. But he said, you've got to find somebody that knows how to deal with that. And he said, I don't even have anybody to recommend to you. And so that's when I went on to the internet and started scouring it, and the patient groups. And there used to be there was a group called California Lyme that was a Yahoo group. There used to be a whole bunch of Yahoo groups. Those have been phased out, and there's different groups now. But California Lyme, somebody gave me a recommendation of an ILADS doctor in California. There were a few of them at the time. There are a few more now, still not tons. And then that started us down the road of Lyme disease and related It wasn't just Lyme, as we all know, Bartonella and other kinds of things.
Yeah, so Rachel, tell us what that was like when you finally, left this children's hospital. You weren't getting help. They were telling you it's all in your head and there's nothing really wrong with you. And now finally going to see a Lyme literate doctor. So curious from your standpoint as the patient and as a young child, what it was like going to see a Lyme literate doctor and what that treatment protocol looked like once you saw this doctor.
So that was such a happy day when I went to the Lyme doctor. It was a completely different experience. I wrote in great detail in my journal about it. Like, it was a 2-hour appointment, which so many of these specialists you go to, you have a few minutes, they don't believe you, and it's just a bad experience. And so for this guy, we had 2 hours, we could tell everything that happened. And I was just so aware of the fact that he was listening and like really taking in what we were saying and believing everything, when at that point, unfortunately, I was very used to people questioning everything we were saying. And so he was believing us. And then he was saying he wanted to do testing, but he really thought that I most likely had Lyme. And so it was so wonderful to finally, after at this point, what had been like 7 or 8 months or something of like, nothing. And then to finally feel that validation that like this whole time I've been saying this, and now somebody finally believes me, and somebody that has the ability to do something about it. And so he, by this time I had just turned 14. And so he put me on, we started a whole antibiotic regimen, and I had to cut out all sugar. And so that was really a big thing. I'm actually kind of stunned at my past self that I was willing to do that. I can't fathom doing that, but like I did for some reason. And so I cut out.
I was too.
So I cut out all sugar, and I was willing to do it. I've got to believe, just because, at that point it had gotten so bad that it's like you're kind of willing to do anything. But so I cut out sugar, we went on the antibiotics, and then promptly got sicker than I had like ever been to that point, and everything just exploded.
So Rachel, I want to take us off on a bit of a tangent and talk to you about doctors. So one of the ways you teach doctors in your book, which I think is unique, is you actually teach there are 3 different types of doctors. You talk about the doctors who didn't believe you. You talked about the doctors who did believe you, but didn't believe in your future.
Mhm.
And then you talked about doctors who really believed you and believed you had a future. So talk to us about those 3 different types of doctors and how each of those experiences were different for you, and how that was impacting the young first child and then young woman who was going through the journey.
Yeah, so the first whole bunch of doctors that we saw were the ones in the group of people that did not believe me. And unfortunately, those are the ones that, I was 13 years old, and those are the ones that have completely molded and shaped me into how I view doctors to this day. So even though I'm 32 and I might have a fully broken wrist and it's obvious, I go into the doctor ready to fight because I believe that they are not going to look at my arm and think that it's broken. And so that shaped me in a humongous way. And so a lot of those doctors were the ones that we saw at the beginning. But then we got our Lyme doctor, who was amazing, and he broke that mold. I didn't think there was a doctor that existed that could actually believe me at that point. And so then he broke that mold, and that was fantastic. And we worked with their office for many years. And so that was huge. It didn't change my view on any other doctors, but it showed me that he could be like that. And then, yeah, we had other practitioners along the way who were also good, and I liked them. But that they kind of had this view that I would always be sick, always need to be, lowering my expectations for what I could do for myself. And so that also impacted me in ways I didn't even realize at the time. Like, I just was like, oh yeah, and I would parrot back that to other people. I'm always going to be sick. I'm always going to have to, just kind of find ways to be happy and whatever. But yeah, so I really took that knowledge in, and it wasn't until many years later that I found neural retraining, which I know we'll talk about later, from dynamic neural retraining system, that I realized that belief was really limiting me, and that I was just living my life as someone who believed that I could only get to a certain point.
So I think it's important for us just at this point, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about neurology and neural retraining and neurological injuries, because there isn't enough about that, in my view, in this community. But it is important for us to understand that you can have a well-intentioned doctor who is going to be placing limits on you, and that is going to have an impact on the belief system that you have about where you're ultimately going to be capable of going and whether or not you're going to be able to heal, right? So we have to be careful with doctors, right? And another one of the things I think you taught very powerfully in your book is how these experiences that you had, and it seems like maybe you've overcome that since then, but at least the way you wrote it in the book was that it made you hesitate to describe to doctors what was going on with you. In fact, even going to doctors at all when you had a unique symptom. So can you talk a little bit more about how important it is to be able to, even in the face of your belief that a doctor is not going to believe you, describe your symptoms to the doctor, so at least the doctor can give you whatever help a doctor can give you if you're either not going or you're not going and giving all the information that the doctor may need in order to help you to get better.
So, okay, so say that again. What is the question there?
And my question is the way you taught it in the book was that you were hesitant to talk about your strange symptoms to doctors, right? You said on some level you were afraid to go at all. And then when you went, you weren't going to give the doctor the information about the symptom, the unique symptom, right? And of course, if the doctor doesn't have the information, the doctor can't help us. So, you know, this sort of culture of gaslighting is putting us in a position where we can't get help from the people who are supposed to be helping us.
Yes. Yeah. So that's something that, again, I still struggle with now, in terms of anytime something bizarre, comes up, trying to decide, is this worth going and potentially having to fight for? But something that's been huge for me is just having a medical team of practitioners of all different types, and that I can go to with anything, and knowing that they'll believe me. That's huge. Like at this point, if I see a doctor, like I watched my mom advocate for me for all of my teens. And so then I got to see that. And so now I've begun doing that for myself. So if I go to a doctor, and it's not, they're not believing me or whatever, then I now know that like that's their problem, not my problem, and we're going to go somewhere else. So that's been something that's big for me, is to just be able to know when to walk away and to just find somebody else.
So, Dorothy, let's talk about this from a parental standpoint, because we are going to see all three types of these doctors when we're bringing our children for treatment for Lyme disease, right? So you've already talked about migrating symptoms and how that's a typical element of Lyme disease, which of course is also a typical element of doctors believing you're either malingering or you're engaging in inappropriate behavior as a parent. So talk about what your experiences were with doctors who didn't believe you and or Rachel, doctors who did believe that your child was sick, but that she could never get better, versus doctors who believed that she was sick and helped her to understand that she could get better and could live the life that she's now manifesting.
Well, some of that, I mean, interesting. These are thought-provoking questions, Rich. In the beginning, we were just trying to get to anybody that believed us and thought they could help. And then through the years, as she got better from her initial, she was in a wheelchair for about 3 years. And then once that phase was behind us, she lived at home and went to community college for 2 years. And then she transferred to a 4-year college. She was really handling pretty much her own medical stuff. And she did learn to be an advocate, and she goes in with a written agenda when she goes to a doctor's appointment, and hands a copy to the doctor, has a copy here. These are the bullet points that I want to discuss with you. But and so a lot of the things that she was saying about people that didn't believe she would get better and stuff, I wasn't necessarily party to those conversations. She would tell me about it later. So I think learning to navigate the medical system is a huge thing for everybody, whether you got Lyme disease or not. And so those were, you know, those were important lessons. And just because, you know, again, just because a dog, one of the things I think, and I hear this from patients all the time, well, the doctor said such and such. I think you need to have a healthy skepticism. And so when the doctor says such and such, you know, just this morning I was reading one of those articles in, I don't know, it's the New York Times or something, where they have like medical mysteries and they go through and they say, and it was somebody, didn't have anything to do with Lyme disease, but it was, this fellow had gone to so many specialists through the years, you know, for whatever, and the problem ended up being something, you know, completely different than what, you know, the first 12 doctors, you know, were looking at. And I just think that there's, that's the kind of thing that we all have to be, we have to educate ourselves and we have to have a healthy skepticism. And so when the doctor, it's not that you disregard everything that the doctor says, but that you take it and you think about it, and you know, you go Google some terms so we know what we're talking about. And you know, it's a huge thing, as I say, that's not limited to Lyme disease.
Well, it's not limited to Lyme disease. It's endemic in the medical community. But another one of the things that became, painfully obvious to me is that one of the challenges that we have as educated people is we're not given the basic skills we need to interface with doctors. And part of the reason I wanted to flesh this out with Rachel today is I've never read a book where somebody distinguished well-intentioned doctors who are believing you but placing a ceiling on your emotional successes versus doctors who believe you and are not putting any ceilings on you. So, we can have doctors that we love who are really good people who are believing us, but they could be hurting us emotionally, right? And we really have to make sure that we understand that we need medical professionals to help us with our physiological issues, at least, and I'd like your response to this, Rachel, or your reaction to it, and medical professionals who should be helping us with our emotional issues. And in some cases, the people who are trained to treat us medically are actually hurting us emotionally.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I never realized at the time, those limiting beliefs that were being implanted. Like I didn't realize it till 8 or 9 years later. So I think it's really an important distinction.
And it's an important part of being medically literate. Right? One of the things we talk about here at Tick Boot Camp is some of the skills you need to get through this journey. And medical literacy is one of those basic skills. And quite frankly, Rachel will be stealing your 3 levels of doctors, and we'll be using that when we teach this because it is important for us to understand. Even well-intentioned people can sometimes place limitations on us. And if we are not aware of how our brain works and we don't understand that beliefs are often going to be implanted in our brain because we don't know how to guard it, then we can put ourselves in a position where we become the fleas that we're going to talk about later. But I'll let Matt take you through the next elements of your journey.
Rachel, let's get back to your experience, your journey. You're transitioning now to this Lyme literate doctor, and you're feeling really crappy from all the antibiotics and things that you're taking. So walk us through what happens next, right? Because we know this is very common, unfortunately, with people with chronic Lyme disease. How do you respond to this feeling worse, phenomenon with these antibiotics, and then what goes on next there?
So at this point, I had so much pain all over, and I was not able to lay down flat or sit up straight because of back pain and breathing issues. So I could only breathe and be okay in a reclined position. So we had, I was spending 100% of my time in a hospital bed in my room that we had rented. And so
We rented the bed.
we
not the
rented
room.
the bed, not the room. It was my room. And so then we owned that. But so then, so I was just getting worse and worse at this point, unable to go to school. Because again, I was just, stuck in that reclined position in my room. And so then at this point, not only was I deteriorating physically in ways that we just didn't even know were possible. You think you've hit rock bottom and then there's still more to go. And so, but also not just physically, but mentally at my absolute worst and extremely depressed and just downward spiraling.
So, Dorothy, at this point, are you reacting and changing doctors? What do you do as the mom now, seeing your daughter get even worse now that you have, what it is, Lyme disease, and your daughter's getting worse? How do you respond? Do you stay the course, or do you pivot to another doctor?
Well, we stayed the course. It was at this time that my mom died, and there was a lot going on, sort of emotionally, and she was, we were just trying to, we still believed that the Lyme doctor was the one. We were kind of staking our staking our future on him. And we were just trying to, to get through each day. And I don't know if you want us to go into what happened next.
Yes, please.
Okay. You want to say it? You want me to say it?
I can say it, but so it was just my depression got so bad that it just got to a point where I just felt like there was no way out. And so then after a supremely awful day that you can read about in the book, I ended up in an adolescent teenage psychiatric facility where I was on a 72-hour hold. Though I did not know that because no one specified that. So I didn't know how long I was going to be there, but it was a 72-hour hold that I was there for.
So, first of all, thank you for sharing that, because Rich and I can't tell you how many people have told us they've been in the same position, but don't want to share publicly on this podcast or with others. And I think it's so important that we realize the psychological impact this disease has. We're not saying that anybody with chronic Lyme is crazy, but the Lyme bacteria itself does impact your mental health. And we have to recognize that as Lyme patients, because it's part of understanding what we're going to go through and what we need to deal with in order to get better. And yes, we can get better like you did, Rachel. So I just want to kind of jump with that little PSA there. So walk us through, if you can, just a little bit of what that was like, and then what comes next in your healing journey after this 72-hour hold.
Yeah, so when I was there, I mean, it was beyond upsetting. I was in, a totally different environment, felt like I was being put in jail for something that I had done. At the time, I was very upset at my parents because they had been the ones to call 911. So I felt like I had absolutely nobody, and I was put in this thing that felt like a prison. And I was still in horrific pain all the time, but now I didn't even have my support system there. I was just surrounded by a bunch of other people with their own problems. And so after the 72-hour hold, I came back home and then was much worse off after that over the next few months. We got on some antidepressants, which I was actually on for quite some time. And that was very important for my continued well-being. And then we ended up just sort of at such a low point. And then my mom learned about hyperbaric oxygen chamber therapy. And at this point, I was having so many neurological issues too, with memory and being able to concentrate. And that was really impacting. I mean, I was not in school. I wasn't doing anything other than sitting just in my bedroom watching TV all day. And so then that started sort of the next leg of our journey by going to a couple hours away to a hyperbaric oxygen chamber center.
If I can go in and talk about the 72-hour hold, part of what was going on there was when, she was there and I took all of her, we followed her. She was transported by ambulance, but my husband and I followed in the car, and I had her bag of medications. And I was telling them, trying to give her them the history of this, and they didn't particularly want to hear it. And they didn't want her to be, I was insisting she had to take this medication. had to continue with his antibiotics. And they said, well, because it was like midnight by the time she was there, so that I should talk to the medical director the next day. And so, I put in a call to him, first thing. And he was telling me, he was really resistant to the idea of her taking these antibiotics. And he said that he used to live in Connecticut, and so he knew all about Lyme disease. And so this wasn't Lyme disease. So, I mean, at that point, he hadn't examined her. He knew nothing about her medical history. And yet but I used all my powers of persuasion, and I offered to set up a phone consult with the Lyme doctor, but he didn't want to do that. No need to do that. But I finally talked him into continuing the antibiotics. And there were also a bunch of supplements and stuff. They said, okay, we'll set the supplements aside. How about we continue the antibiotics? And somehow he agreed to do that. And so, but there were other times when we went to visiting hours at the place, and before we got there early, and there was a psych tech that took us in a separate room, my husband and I, just to talk to us. And he just said, your daughter's scamming you. There's nothing wrong with her. You guys have just caught it. And it's like, okay, at that time it was that she'd been there 24 hours. And, it was just like, all this, all of this. And it was just at that point, we just wanted her out. But we also knew how horrendous it was before, and we really didn't know what to do. And it was at that time that I first got our Lyme doctor had previously suggested that I talk to Sandy Berenbaum, who was this Lyme literate family therapist on the East Coast. And so this was, now there's a lot of people doing remote counseling and that kind of stuff, but that wasn't a thing really then. And I thought, when he first told me, oh, this is somebody, this was before it happened, he gave me her name and stuff, you ought to talk to her. I remember thinking, what is somebody on the East Coast going to do for me? And well, what she did was she helped save our lives. And so I talked to her while, and I left her a message. She called me right back. And in my message, I said, said who I was and who our doctor was, and that my daughter was on a 72-hour psych hold, and I don't know what to do next. And she called me, and we started working together. And I remember one of the things she said is, you need a plan. And so we started devising a plan. And one of the things that she said, because I was thinking, well, we just need to find the right facility for her to, that we could have her admitted to a facility, and that they'll take care of the Lyme and they'll take care of the other stuff. And she said, no such facility, basically, at that time. And she said, you have to, your house has to become the hospital, and you have to find what you need and do what you need to do. And so that started us on the journey. And the Lyme doctor was the one that suggested the hyperbaric oxygen, and we did that. And I think it helped in psychologically. I think her mind worked better after doing that. She had really had a lot of episodes of just, not being able to remember things, very, not clear thinking, that kind of stuff. But it didn't, her experience with the hyperbaric is it didn't do anything for the physical pain. And in her mind, and herself, her 14 at that point, her 14-year-old self, the pain was what was the problem. And the thing is, it was a huge problem, but there were also all these other things. And she didn't have an appreciation for the fact that she couldn't remember stuff. You could tell her something and 5 minutes later, she wouldn't know that you had said it. And so we did the hyperbaric, and then we came back, and then there were at some point, we saw also with our doctor's recommendation, we started working with a naturopath and a lot of things with detoxification. So we started working with different practitioners, but really under the purview of the Lyme doctor. And it was a long process. So.
Yeah, Rachel, can you tell us some of the key things, well, that came after this? So the hyperbaric oxygen therapy, it sounds like helped with your memory, but not so much the physical side of things. So what things came next, and which ones were most impactful, do you believe, in your healing journey?
So it's so hard because people, contact me now and they're like, well, what did you do to get better? And it's like, I don't even know because I did everything. And so it's like, it's very hard to tell what helped. But for me, I mean, I was taking so many pills, so many supplements, and it was hard to tell. It's like when I went off of them, I'd have less energy, but it was like it was hard to tell what was really working. But when I started seeing a specialized chiropractor for the very top vertebra of the neck, that changed everything. And that was the end of our book was when I started seeing him, because it was him and his treatment that ended up basically turning off all of my pain after 14 treatments with him, which then led me to being able to walk. And so that was a huge thing. And today I still see an upper cervical chiropractor. And I find that like when I'm in alignment, everything goes better. And when I'm out of alignment, all of these other things start to fall apart. So that was like, if I had to pick one thing that we did, that was it. But that was also years after having done all of these antibiotics, going after the bugs, all of these supplements. And so, I mean, we had all of these things that I'm sure also did their part.
So let's dive into a little bit deeper because, Rich knows I'm a huge advocate of the chiropractor, and I just feel better when I'm in alignment, to your point, right? Like the pain that I just feel like I move better, I have more energy, I sleep better. And I even think sometimes I'm a little bit sharper, right? When I notice at work from the chiropractor, I'm just more on my game when it comes to my ability to do my job. So what was this the first chiropractor you saw, but that you had relief from? Was it the specialization, or was it just you think the chiropractic care in general?
I think it was the first chiropractor I ever really saw. But he had actually seen another friend of mine with Lyme who was very similar to my case, with in a wheelchair, lots of pain. So she had recommended him to us. And so she had also seen great benefit from working with him. So I do think it has something to do with the type of chiropractic. Like it wasn't just any random chiropractor. He was doing something very specific to the very top of the neck there. And as I've now years, after finishing up with him and living in different places, I've tried a bunch of different chiropractors, and I'm to the point I won't see any chiropractor. No one's touching my neck except for a NUCCA chiropractor, NUCCA. It's like this upper cervical chiropractor, because that is what works for me. That is the best. That's what works for me and my body. So I do think it was also something specific to the type of chiropractic he was doing.
So in addition to the physiological, the physical, right, where the physical care you were getting with the chiropractor really helped you walk again, that was huge. There's also the neuropsychological piece too, right? And especially when you mentioned the DNRS, I really want to make sure we have time to talk about the neural sculpting of impact of Lyme disease. So I know for myself, and it sounds like for you, our brain pathways almost get wired in a bad way after being sick for so long. And our thought patterns, the way we respond to things, both, what we're aware of and what we're not aware of, how we respond to them from a neural standpoint, have to be modified once we start to feel better again. So what did it look like for you? Tell us, I guess at a high level, what brought DNRS into the picture for you, both of you, and then what it was like when you first started going through DNRS and how that was pivotal in your healing as well.
Yeah, so leading up to DNRS, so after I got after I began walking, I thought all of my problems were going to be solved. Once I can walk, everything will be fine. And that was not what happened. I was still very much dealing with Lyme, still dealing with so much fatigue and weakness. And I could walk from point A to point A to point B, but then I had to sit down. And that just continued year after year. I went off to college. I was just still really struggling physically with, like, I wanted to go out and do all of the things, but I just could not physically do them. And we couldn't figure out why. But then I went to college in Oregon and got worse and worse and worse. And then we realized it was actually that I was being exposed to toxic mold in one of the buildings that I spent a lot of time in. So I ended up having to drop out of grad school and deal solely with mold. And so then while dealing with mold, I developed a lot of food allergies and sensitivities, and then chemical sensitivities. And so that all kind of happened while we were going after the mold. And so it started kind of low, and then just kept getting worse and worse. And then at this point, my husband and I had moved to Arizona, and we were living there thinking that would be better for the mold. And I was trying to just get my life on track. But the chemical sensitivities and the food sensitivities were just getting worse and worse. And we were trying all these different antihistamine medications. My mold doctor and my Lyme doctor, everybody, we were all trying to figure out how to get this chemical and food issue under control. And I worked at a school. And so there's so many chemicals, cleaning chemicals in a school. And it just got so bad that I would just have like a rash all over my body. My hands would be red and burning and cracked. And it was becoming so bad that I was not going to be able to continue doing what we were doing and working there. And so I started hearing about DNRS. Like, I have an Instagram, Resiliently Rachel, where I post about stuff, and I started posting just saying, this is ridiculous. Like, my life is being so impacted by this, but it didn't used to be impacted by this. And people would reach out and say, oh, there's this thing called dynamic neural retraining system. And, you can retrain your brain and you can get better from that. And I was like, that's ridiculous. And like, I wouldn't even look into it. I was not going to have anyone, as a history as someone who is used to people telling me that it's all in my head, and that, like, if I wanted to make it better, I would just make it better. I was like, I'm not doing any of that. So I didn't even look into it. And then my mom ended up being at some Lyme conference, and she met my mold doctor there, and they were talking, and she just kind of said, oh, Rachel's, having this issue. And he had said, have her look into DNRS. And then, and so then that was something else. And I was like, gosh, people keep telling me this. And then, do you guys know Scott Forsgren, Better Health Guy? Okay, he's in the community, does a lot of health stuff. And so anyways, I know him. And so then he reached out and was like, you should really look into DNRS. So at this point, so many people had been telling me about this that I finally Googled it and then looked into it. And instantly, I mean, that day I bought the DVDs, because just reading the stories of people who had food and chemical sensitivities, who went through this program and then could eat food and be around chemicals and not, have a rash all over their body and not be really sick from the food. So I immediately ordered the DVDs, and I just put everything I had into that program. And back then it was 2018, so it was pre-COVID. So they actually had in-person seminars. So after a month of doing the DVDs, I was able to go to Canada and do a 1-week program for DNRS there. And I mean, it was absolutely life-changing. I was able, over the next few months, to get all of my food back. I can eat anything I want now. I can be around chemicals. People spray, perfume or cologne. I work at a school. The older people wear cologne, and I can walk by and be like, that doesn't smell good. And that's it. Like, it doesn't affect me. And it's just, I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't gone through it myself. Like, it was life-changing.
That is so cool. And I can't wait to come back and build that a little bit more. But I want to go back to a little an earlier part of your story, which I want to talk about the mold piece of it before we get there, right? Because I'm very much in this. Let's look at physical issues and emotional issues separately, right? Your mom did talk about how we have these migrating symptoms, and we haven't really built out the emotional piece yet. And clearly, Matt knows we want to get to the DNRS piece. But let's stay with the mold piece. I think that's an important part of this journey. How did the mold first surface, and how did you begin treating that?
Yeah, so I was at college, and I'm trying to just live my life, and I was just getting weaker and weaker. And like, it would be the type of thing where you go up a flight of stairs, and then I would have to stand and hold on to the railing at the top. And it was like, I felt like all of the blood had just rushed out of me. And it was like, if I tried to take a step, I would fall. So I had to sometimes stand there for like 30 seconds and then wait for the blood to magically start pumping again. And then I could kind of keep going. And so it just was weird symptoms, a lot of heart palpitations. So, you know, we went to a cardiologist, you go to all the different doctors, they say, you're healthy as can be, you know, why are you in my office? And it's like, I was hoping you could tell me that. And so we just went to all the different people and we couldn't figure it out. We kept thinking, oh, it must be the Lyme. So we tried to like change up the Lyme treatment and it just wasn't working. And then finally, you know, my mom at this point had really kind of been doing a lot of her advocacy, and she knew a lot of people in the Lyme world, which kind of also encompasses the mold community as well. And so she just started reaching out to people and just kind of explaining. I think we even had a write-up. She's like, this is what my daughter wrote.
I had Rachel, I said, write down just all your symptoms and email it to me. And I sent it to somebody that I know, and she sent it to somebody else, to a prominent Lyme doctor on the East Coast, not our doctor, and just somebody she knows personally. And she said, what, she didn't even say who it was, just, what do you think this person is? And they said, mold. And so, oh, okay. And I had been, you know, starting to hear about that from people, but I hadn't put it together for us. And so, so we found a mold doctor.
Who was
And-
also a Lyme doctor, which
Who
was
was also-
fantastic, and
Yeah.
who knew my previous Lyme doctor. So we were able to kind of do the Lyme and the mold treatment together, which actually was the key to me being able to get off antibiotics. I was on antibiotics for 10 years straight, which wreaked havoc with a whole bunch of stuff, but I could not get off of it. And then like anytime we got off, instantly I would get so sick that I'm like just so physical, all the symptoms would come back. And so it wasn't until treating the mold and the Lyme together that then I was able to get off antibiotics and have not been on them since.
So we've had many doctors on this podcast tell us that in many cases, once they treat the mold, they don't have to treat the Lyme any further, because the immunosuppressive nature of the mold disease will, and once that is resolved, your immune system will then function again. So that was a really important part of this, that I didn't want to jump over from the standpoint of folks in our community wanting to see what steps you've taken. Again, maybe they'll take different steps, maybe they won't, but we do need to build out this mold piece of it.
Yeah. And that's what happened for us. That, like, I mean, I say us, it's an us, it's in our family.
It is an us.
I always use like the royal we, and people are like, who's we? And I'm like, it's me, but my mom's there and my dad, and you know, it's all of us. So yeah, that's what happened to us, me, when we started treating mold and then got off the antibiotics, and then I was off Lyme treatment. I mean, like for years. I mean, it was amazing. I didn't think that would be able to happen.
Rachel, let's talk a little bit more about your detoxing from mold. I was just trying to find that section in the book. On page 263 of the book, you actually talk about what the process was from detoxing from mold, right? So I want folks to hear that full story, because it was a lot of work. I mean, each one of these processes you've gone through, there wasn't a magic pill that was given to Rachel, and then she went on to the next pill, and then she went on to the next pill. There was a lot of Rachel involved in all this. So I want you to build out this mold piece, not just what was done for you, but what you ultimately had to do, because it was really powerful for me to say, holy cow, this kid had to, you know, stay away from the theaters, couldn't go to the store. I mean, it was a really, you know, rigorous process. So give us the detail on that.
Yeah, so I mean, boy, we could write, I'm not going to, but we could write a whole book about the mold thing, because that's a very small portion. This memoir, we just focused specifically on my teen years.
Right, it was a journey.
Yeah, but like that mold experience was so intense. And I mean, I had preparation because of the Lyme treatment, but the mold treatment, I was working with a doctor who was sort of following the Shoemaker protocol, which is a mold protocol. And so not following 100%, but mostly following it. And And it is so rigorous. And it's like you do all these tests, and then based on the tests, you can start certain medicine, and you do this medicine. You start with 1 drop, the next day 2 drops, 4 days later 4 drops 3 times a day. And then it's like you have to have all those charts that my dad did. We had to bring them back for when I can take all of my meds. And I mean, this med can't be next to this med, but this one has to be right before this one. I mean, it was a full-time job. And it's like you'll do something for a week, and then you'll test, and then you'll do this for a week, and then you'll stop it, and then you'll do a different medicine. And so again, I had to drop out of grad school, and this became my full-time job. And my doctor was adamant that while we were detoxing from mold, I couldn't be in any mold. And I lived in the Pacific Northwest at the time, so we couldn't be sure that anywhere I went, like we couldn't be sure if there was mold or not there. And so we tested my apartment, and there was no mold. So it ended up being 13 months where I didn't go anywhere except for the doctor, when I would wear like a charcoal face mask when I was there, and I would only go to the doctor or to get my blood drawn. Otherwise, I just stayed home. And my boyfriend, who's my husband now, he did all the shopping. We did online shopping. And yeah, so I was just fully trapped at home in my apartment, just I was like trying to follow it to the T. Like I was the model patient. I was like, we're going to do this, because I'd seen a glimpse of what my life could be like, and then it was taken away. And so we just, yeah, it was a really long process. But I mean, eventually it got to the point where I was a good amount better. But it wasn't until the DNRS that we kind of officially got it.
Well, but you are making these gains, right? So because one of the things that you had said when Matt was asking you was like, which of these protocols was the protocol? And Rachel, quite frankly, in every one of the interviews we've done, and again, there's 400 folks just like you we've interviewed, and hundreds more who we haven't published as podcast episodes. It's never one thing, and it's always a mistake to believe it is going to be one thing. It's a series of things that are going to layer on top of one another, and you're going to unpeel this onion and get better and better and better, right? So it was kind of you to answer Matt's question about the one thing, but it wasn't one thing, right? There is no one thing. And now we do have to unfold this mold piece. And I love the metaphor that you had used. I think one of the doctors shared with you is that if you do not deal with the mold, you're never going to be able to get better. It's like using a towel in the shower, a wet towel in the shower, to try to dry yourself off when more and more water is coming on, right? And that's what was happening with you. And that's why you were on the antibiotics for 10 years, because the mold issues were immunosuppressive. And as a result of that, the only way that the microbes could be managed was with the antibiotics. And once you dealt with the mold issue, then your immune system was healthy enough to take the next step in the journey.
Yeah. And it was interesting because we really hadn't been aware of that until this next step of our journey. When we became aware of the mold, we didn't realize just how much of an impact. Like when we started treating the mold, I just thought we were treating the mold because of, everything from my college. I had no idea that it would then have such an impact on the Lyme as well.
All right, so now you have this immune system that has been suppressed for a long time. Actually, before we leave the mold piece, I want to get to the MCAS piece in a minute, but let me stay with the mold piece one more. Dorothy, give us some input on your perspective on the mold piece and how vital that was to your daughter's healing. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about community and the information you were getting from different community groups.
Well, in terms of I had heard of mold as being something, I kind of go in and out of different online support groups and stuff, to be in touch with the community. And there would be people that were saying, oh yeah, mold was a problem. Mold was a problem. Well, looking around my house, it didn't seem like it was a problem. And one of the naturopaths that we had been seeing had suggested to us that this is when Rachel was still living at home, that we should investigate mold. And at that time, it was very hard to get much information about this kind of thing. And we had somebody come, and frankly, we spent a lot of money, excuse me, to have somebody come and analyze the house. And they said, oh, it's fine, there's no mold here. And then that was when she was still living at home. And so then it was like she said, we just thought, oh, well, it's because it rains so much up in Portland. That's why, there's mold up there. But later, we actually found after when she was going to the mold doctor and everything that he had us do an ERMI test at home, and we flunked. And he said he did not want Rachel setting a foot in our house until we could pass the mold test. And so I was like, okay, you tell me who to come do the inspection. And he had some recommendations. And so somebody came and they found mold under the kitchen sink. They had to pull up the flooring under the kitchen sink, and I'd forgotten about it years before our dishwasher had a leak, and somebody had come and fixed it and whatever, and it had gotten, moisture had gotten under there, and there was a whole lot of mold there. And when you really get the remediation come and they do it right, they come and actually sealed the kitchen. There was actually like a zipper to go in and out. And the guy had a hazmat suit on and cleaned that. And there was one of the bathrooms, under the bathroom sink, there was also mold. And so that got replaced.
So I'd been exposed to mold before college. It was just the black mold that we tested at college that brought our attention to it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't affecting the rest of your family, Rachel, I would guess, because they were healthy and they were moving and they were detoxing, and it wasn't something that was ultimately building up. But for you, because you were sick, because you were immobile, because you couldn't detox, what starts to happen is the mycotoxins begin to increase, build up in your body, and you now find yourself in another moldy place, and it's just sort of like I'm using Matt's word, dog piling on top of one another. I mean, all these things are piling. So was the mold affecting your mom? No. Was it affecting your dad? No. Was it affecting your brother? No. It wasn't affecting anyone. They were healthy. They were moving. It wasn't doing it, right? You get to the point where you now have chronic inflammatory response syndrome. Why? Because you can't detox.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just realize now that mold is a huge problem for an awful lot of people. and it's, that it can actually, it can cause symptoms very much like Lyme disease, even if the person doesn't have Lyme disease. And so it's just, that was, yeah. And again, there's more resources out there now, informational resources. And there just wasn't much there. And so that was a big problem.
Well, Dorothy, here's another place where I'm gonna challenge you as the president of LymeDisease.org, right? Because one of the things you just said is that the mold disease and Lyme disease can have very similar symptoms, right? And the question really is, what is Lyme disease, right? Because we here at Tick Boot Camp, and we've had a lot of challenges on this issue, is we call Lyme disease a disease without a definition, right? Certainly a disease without a consistent definition. Everyone we talk to seems to have a different disease. Philip says it's Lyme plus. We have Horace's definition. We have the CDC. We have all these definitions all over the place. Everybody's got their own definitions, right? So we said, all right, well, since everybody has their own definition, we can come up with ours, right? So our definition for Lyme disease is that it's a polymicrobial, multisystemic, chronic infectious disease, right? And I think if it is in fact what we argue it is, you're going to see these sort of similar presentations when you're immunosuppressed, right? Because if the Lyme bacteria, for example, is suppressing Rachel's immune system, well, other bugs are going to take off and they're going to present in a particular, in a way. Or if it's the mold that's suppressing your immune system, then bugs are going to be taking off, right? So you're going to see a similar presentation. It doesn't matter what's suppressing your immune system, in my view. It is going to present the same way if you have immunosuppressive multimicrobial suppression. Give me your reaction to that, Rachel, first, and then I want the president to give us her response to the Tick Boot Camp definition of Lyme disease.
I think that's great. And I think it's also true. Everybody has a different definition because it's not just some easy, quick, this is exactly what it is. I could not say it better than what you have said.
All right, Madam President. So it's your turn to take me on.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. I would expand on it and say that with the advent of COVID, we get, something else that affects the immune system and, has an awful lot of overlapping symptoms. You might be aware that there's recently come together a coalition of that my organization is part of, and others, where it has kind of an awkward name. I call it IACPAC. It's IACCPAC. It's Infection Associated Chronic Conditions Patient Advocacy Coalition, I think is the last thing.
Yeah.
And it's patient organizations for COVID and fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome and Lyme disease and other stuff. And there are a lot of overlapping symptoms, and there are, there's stuff that, I was lucky enough to go to something last June. The NASEM conference, National Association of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, had a conference in Washington, D.C. to look at these overlapping things. It was really pushed by COVID, because COVID was just affects so many people that they couldn't ignore it anymore. And so there were people that I recognize, from the CDC, from the NIH, and all these people were there saying, oh yeah, there's a lot of overlap between these conditions. And these, from some of them, the same people that I've heard over the years say, oh, chronic Lyme isn't real. And so there is a movement to look at these things differently. And there are some exciting developments in terms of research. And one of the things that they found during COVID is that there was a lot of overlap. Sometimes somebody would go to the doctor, assume they got sick, they assume they have COVID, they give them a COVID test. It's not COVID. Go home, you're still sick, you come back. Well, we'll give you another COVID test. And it wasn't until maybe they, had 3 negative tests that somebody would say, oh, maybe it's something else. And not everybody, but in many cases, it turned out they had Lyme disease.
Yeah.
And so you could also have Lyme disease and COVID at the same time. And also, during the time of COVID, we were all going for walks outside because we weren't supposed to be around other people. So there was, in terms of I don't remember exactly the wording that you said, but as I said, I have no problem with that. I think that it is complex, and that our bodies are complex, and the microbes are complex. And you take, Dr. Horowitz's 16 points where toxins and all these other things, it all gets wrapped up in with your own genetics. And so, maybe you have some genetic predisposition to something in this, so I mean, it's really complex stuff.
Yeah.
And
And not only that, but Dorothy, not only our own genetics, the microbes have the capacity, and we're going to talk more about this with Rachel, on how neuroplasticity can be used against us, but so can epigenetics, right? Because what's happening, these microbes are actually changing our genetic presentation, and in many cases, just changing our genes, right? So I mean, there's just so much here. This is such a a powerful set of microbes, and the way they change us and the way we have to change ourselves back to get healthy is really powerful, right? Which is really what we're talking about here, is all these different steps, right? Because, again, to use Matt's term, all these things are dogpiling on Rachel, right? I mean, she was just like being suppressed. Her health, her physical and emotional health, are being suppressed by all of these things, and we have to take one off at a time, right? So, you get your antibiotic treatment, and you're getting your chiropractic treatment, and you're getting your mold treatment. And now we have all kinds of chemical sensitivities that we hadn't dealt with before, that, Rachel is now getting her life back, and she's working in her dream career. I mean, we haven't built out, some of the other things I want to talk about, how you were emotionally resilient, and how we get to the title of your book, But there were a couple of really cool things that were happening in your life. And one of the things that was happening is you were studying American Sign Language, right? And you were doing that while you were on your healing journey. And that ultimately became a career path for you. So you're working at a school and you're doing what you want to do, and then you're getting really sick again, right? And you have all of these chemical sensitivity. So can you build that out for us? And now, and Matt's going to take you through the MCAS piece.
Oh wait, yeah. Am I waiting for you or for Matt?
Oh yeah, Rachel, if you don't mind jumping in on that piece, and then we'll go down the MCAS a little bit further.
So wait, what did you said, Rich? What did you?
Just build out for us. Just build out for us what was, you're at the stage in your career where you're finally now going to work, right? You're doing what you wanted to do. You're doing your dream job. You're working, you're working in a school and in the speech language pathology arena. And now you're getting sick as a dog, right? Even though you dealt with the Lyme, you dealt with the mold, you dealt with all these other issues, but now you're getting sick again. So what is that?
Yeah, it was so demoralizing because it's like, and it's interesting because, they use so many Clorox wipes in schools. And so it's like I started just being so angry that everyone used Clorox wipes. And it's like I was just blaming the fact that you keep using these Clorox wipes and I'm getting sick and it's because of your Clorox wipes. And so that it just started affecting everything. I mean, I would go to work in the morning without burning hands and my face burning, without breathing issues. And as soon as I get there, it would just be bad all day. And then I would come home and I'd cover myself in ice packs and just like cooling towels. And it was just every day was so hard to get through because of the symptoms, because of the chemicals. And it was so devastating because any school is going to have chemicals. So it was like, I finally got here. I finally got to where I want to be at a school I really loved. And it's like, I couldn't change the school to not use the chemicals. And I printed out paperwork of all these other things they could do, but they didn't want to hear it. And so, it was just really hard because I was like, where do we go from here if I can't work at any school doing, my job? So it was really, challenging.
And then what led you to become more familiar with mast cell activation syndrome, or as we call it, MCAS, and then the connection between DNRS or brain retraining and how it can help alleviate, if not eliminate, these MCAS symptoms that you were experiencing in a school place?
Yeah, so I got the diagnosis from my mold doctor, who knew a lot about, because a lot of his mold patients were having mast cell issues. And so I got the diagnosis from him. And at first, we tried all these different like drugs and different things to antihistamine and things to try to help with it. But everything we did was just getting worse. And so then he put me on like an elimination diet to try to get all of the histamine gone. And if you eliminate all the food, then maybe it won't happen. But the more foods that I eliminated, the more problem I was having. And so it was just getting worse and I just had no food to eat while it was getting worse. And so then when I began learning about the dynamic neural retraining system, and there's other systems out there as well, that's not the only brain retraining and brain rewiring program, but it's the one that I did. But when I started learning about that, then I realized that like, even though I know it's well-meaning when a doctor says, do this elimination diet, what it was doing in my brain was it was just reinforcing that all of these foods are dangerous and they're going to hurt me. And so you're trying to eliminate them and you become hyper aware all the time of, I can't eat that. Oh, I can't eat this. And all you're doing is having your brain just spiral and be telling you, that you can't eat that because it's going to make you sick. So then when you have it, it's going to make you sick. And you just keep reinforcing that pathway.
Rachel, isn't there two sides to that? Because I think, and I want Matt to continue to participate in the MCAS part of the conversation because, there is a physiological and an emotional element to the MCAS, right? Because what was happening is you were immunosuppressed when you had all of the microbes. You had both Lyme and Bartonella at least, right? You had the mold toxins that you were dealing with, right? So you have these microbes, you have mold toxins, right? So your immune system is suppressed. You need help, and this is why you're in antibiotics for 10 years. Now that is resolved, and now your immune system is going crazy, right? Now we have an overactive immune system, right? And now your body is now responding to food as if it is an allergy, right? And now it's hyperactive. That we have to figure out, how that slows down. And I'm just wondering whether or not it was just DNRS or whether DNRS helped you with the piece of the emotional injury that you suffered as a result of now having your immune system essentially attacking the foods that were, and do you think this was leaky gut? And there was an immune response to foods you're eating, because you went down to 4 foods, right? I mean, one of the really painful, scary parts of I'm reading this book is like, oh shit, this kid's not going to be able to eat anything at all. She's down to 4, right? I mean, what do we have left? She's going to starve to death, right? I mean, that's. By the way, it was really well written, by the way. But I mean, it's like, oh, what? Now her immune system is overreacting, right? So give us the physiological piece versus the emotional piece, because I think they're separate.
So we tested for leaky gut and it came back that wasn't it. And we tested like SIBO. I don't remember what that stands for, but
small intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So we tested for SIBO and it was like, I was adamant that was going to come back. Oh, absolutely. That's, we're having these issues. Nope. Came back that I didn't have that. So like all these things we were testing for and it wasn't coming back. And again, we were going on the antihistamine things and it helped like a little bit, but it didn't help it enough. Like I was still breaking out into a rash and still having all of these things. So then when I went to DNRS, with DNRS, they suggest that if you're able to kind of stop the supplements if you can, just to kind of see what DNRS can do without all the other stuff. Because that's the thing, you have so many things going on at once. What do you say it is? So I didn't feel like most of the supplements I was on were even doing anything at the time. So I stopped 100% of every single thing that I was on. So I had no pills, no anything. And I started DNRS. And I mean, I got all my foods back. I do not break out into a rash. I do not get sick. And I mean, and I never went back on those, any of those pills.
But when we do an elimination diet, for example, as we're eliminating foods, then, so part of what I'm wondering about, and I'd like you to sort of weigh in on this as well, is, do you think it was possible that the supplements you were taking, which may have been antimicrobial, may have been supercharging your immune system? Your immune system was then responding to foods as if they were allergens, and then once you eliminated those supplements, you had a more stable immune system, and that's why you got better, and not necessarily just from the neural retraining.
I mean, I don't know. It's hard because people reach out all the time and they're like, do you think if you didn't do any of the other stuff, would DNRS have gotten you better? And that's such a hard question, because I know there are people who haven't done all the stuff that I've done and they just did DNRS and some got better, some didn't. For me, I always say, I think everything I did played a part in helping. I think I did so much detox. I was on so many different meds that, scientifically you can say that med should be doing this good thing for you. So I think all of it played a part. And I think because I did DNRS when I did, I had done so much treatment for so many different things before it, that I think I did DNRS at the perfect time, because I think I had been set up for success by doing everything that I had done before it.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll use Dr. Carnahan's term. She calls herself a highly sensitive person, and she says she has a tiny toxic bucket, right? So she's just more prone to be triggered by certain chemicals, whether it's cologne, whether it's perfume, whether it's laundry detergent, whether it's, car fumes, right? And I look back at my childhood and I can tell you, me and my sister in a family of 3, my brother was the exception, we were always sensitive to things like my grandfather's cologne, right? It would always be like, oh, come on, Gramps, like, what are you doing? So it didn't have any impact on our health, but it always sort of bothered us. So when I got sick with Lyme, I became almost intolerant to those things, where they'd put me into a neurological spin when I was exposed to those toxins or those chemicals. So I think it's just our bodies. I think in some cases, many of us, maybe yourself, Rachel, I think myself for sure, we're sort of predisposed or at a disadvantage when we're born because of our biology to these types of things, right? And then I think for me, as I started to rebuild my immune system and get stronger, my reaction to those things is even better than it was when I was, pre-Lyme at this point. So I think I've seen that in my own life. But to answer Rich's question, I'm curious what you think on it, Rachel and Dorothy as well, is do you think that some of these herbal supplements, right, like, for example, echinacea we know, or, there's others that are out there, that have the ability to supercharge the immune system, which is good if you're immune compromised and you need to bolster the immune system. But if you're having all these MCAS reactions, do you think some of the supplements were making your immune system even more overreactive, resulting you becoming even more sensitive to all these things that were triggering your MCAS reactions?
Who knows?
I was gonna say, I
Yeah.
feel like I can't even
Who
answer.
knows?
I
like
don't-
Dorothy's answer.
I
Who
don't-
knows, right?
I mean, it's a good question. I don't know. And I strive to have, like I said earlier, a really good medical team that I trust to make sure, because they're the ones who went to school to know all of the ins and outs of that. So yeah, so I don't know about that, but it's interesting.
Yeah, and don't you think, Dorothy, it's interesting that different treatments are going to be helpful at different times, right? And if we're going to use this analogy of taking one dog off the pile after another, you don't stay with a consistent treatment. It's something that was serving you 6 months ago is not necessarily going to serve you today, and that's not necessarily going to serve you tomorrow, right? Where we have to pivot not only from treatment to treatment, but I think mindset to mindset as well, which we're going to get to in a minute. So Dorothy, give me your thoughts about pivoting from treatments and how we really can't tease out. Because look, when I was reading the book, I was like, what happened here, right? And that's why I couldn't wait to talk to you guys. Do we entirely credit the neural retraining, or is there something else here going on that we need to think about and talk about, just so folks who are listening to this think that maybe there's a combination of things that we have to look at when we're at this stage of our journey?
Well, I think there's always a combination of things going on. I think in her case, she was living in Arizona when she was doing that, and I was in California. And so I was not seeing her in person, but we were, talking regularly. And she was, she dove into doing the DNRS really just with religious fervor.
Well, that's everything, Dorothy, right? I mean, Rachel dove into everything with religious fervor, and I do want to talk about that, how important that is. But let's stay with this.
Yeah. So, and actually, she has a number. She doesn't keep up her blog anymore, but they're still on her website. She has some blogs that she was writing during the process of doing doing DNRS, and she made little videos and, all this, so that's, I think that's all on there, isn't it? For people, excuse me, that want to go for a deep dive into that. But it really seemed like, I remember, it seemed to me that it was just like a week. You'd been doing it for a week, and you said that she had gone to school and that somebody had, the cleaning person had something, and
it took me longer to notice that I was next to it and it was like, I had my first little breakthrough, within about a week or so.
Yeah. And so it really seemed like it was the DNRS. And I mean, I'm not one to say that everybody would have that same result, but that was how it worked for her. And interestingly, I happened to meet a woman in California about right before Rachel started DNRS, and this woman was very involved with trying to get chemicals out of schools. And I am not against people getting chemicals out of schools, but she was telling me that she had this, that she was chemically sensitive herself, and, various, that had been her entry to this. And actually, I guess you had just started it, and at the DNRS. And so I was talking to her, and I thought, well, that's really interesting. I said, my daughter has these issues, and she has just started this thing called DNRS. And the woman said, oh yeah, I tried that. It didn't help. And so that was the whole discussion that we had. I didn't know if it was going to help Rachel at that point. Well, here she started noticing things, and it was better. And I had another occasion to see that woman, and I talked to her, and I said, my daughter's doing this program, and it's really helped her a lot. And I said, you said you did it and it didn't help. She said, yeah, it didn't help. And I said, well, did you, something, I made some reference, because they have these videos that you watch, like 14 hours of
Yeah,
videos
something like that.
that you watch before you start doing it. And I said something about, and then Rachel sent me the things when she was done with them. So, I was looking at them too. And I said, so, did you watch the videos or this or that? And she said, oh, I watched part of one video, but I just didn't have patience for that. Well, not,
Right, yeah.
that's her own life and she's going to do what you do. But you say, oh yeah, I tried it and it didn't help. If you didn't even finish watching the videos, you didn't do it.
Right, no, that's for sure.
Right.
But look, but that's another important part of, I think this is a nice transition, Dorothy, because we've talked with many guests about neural retraining, and we've also developed here a protocol that we're going to be releasing in the near future about timing of treatment, right? And I remember, for example, when I interviewed Ashley Marber, one of the things I said, well, hey, when did you do the neural retraining? She says, well, I certainly didn't do it in the beginning. I was so sick, I couldn't add something else to it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, timing is significant, especially when you're going to use a rigorous protocol like the protocol you use, Rachel. You have to be at a certain level of health in order to be able to have the religious
absolutely.
fervor you would need in order to be able to be successful with this disease, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Matt just corrected me, by the way. I said Ashley Marber was actually Ashley Bellinger who was correcting me on that. So sorry, Ashley's for citing the wrong one of you. Yeah, but it was Ashley Bellinger who said, Rich, I could not have done that. I was just too sick, right? So you're at a stage where you could do that. And I'd also argue, Rachel, I'd like your reaction that you probably wouldn't want to do this until you're at the later stage of the rehabilitation phase of your journey, because there are so many emotional injuries that you're suffering while you're on this journey that you're going to have to do the neural retraining at the end anyway. So you might as well maybe,
Gotta mop it all up.
Yeah, right. So you're gonna have to clean out the brain. I mean, you have to do that, right? And I know that sounds a little hoarse, but it really is something you have to do if you're going to get better, right? You have to retrain your brain. If you don't retrain your brain, you're not going to get better. But the question is when. So, Rachel, is it really at the later stages, not only because you're not well enough to do it, but because you're gonna have to go through a cleansing anyway?
Well, I think everybody is, I mean, again, it's one of those things, everybody is different. So I don't feel like there is like a one size fits all that you can say everyone should wait, or, it's like if somebody is wanting to go for it, I don't believe any harm can come from, even if you are at your sickest and you are bedridden and you go for it, because the thing is, I don't think it's going to hurt you, and it might actually just help and give you tools that you can continue to use. I have continued to use this even after I stopped DNRS. There have been complications that have come up that I've restarted it, or I've just used some of my tools that I've learned from DNRS.
Well,
So
but I agree with you, but let's be blunt about this, right? Is when you were young and you were really sick and you were bedbound, would you have been able to put the kind of focus into
no,
this that was
absolutely
necessary?
not. No,
Right.
I could not have done this. And honestly, I would not have done this until when I did it, I was in the perfect place mentally to do it, that I was willing to do it. I was not willing to do most of the treatments that were way easier than DNRS back in the day. And
Right.
so, I mean, like, it was hard enough to get me to go gluten-free for a little bit as, a teen or
Right.
whatever. And so absolutely, like, it has to be that you are able to put in like the most work at that time. And
Right.
so I would never have done that before.
It's a great protocol. It did allow you to rewire your brain, but maybe earlier on, maybe working with a therapist would have been helpful. Maybe
Yeah.
hypnotism would have been helpful. Yeah, maybe there would have been a less rigorous element of this retraining that could have been available to you that would have been helpful, that didn't require you to be a convert, right?
Yeah, and also that's the thing, is that there are so many ways to retrain your brain. And something before DNRS, which we talked very little about in my book, that I worked with a chiropractic neurologist, also sometimes called a functional neurologist. And what he and I were doing, I was having this weird issue where my left arm was just not communicating with the rest of my body.
What
And
do you think I was going to get there, Rachel? You thought I was going to
So I worked with him. So that's something, sometimes I will recommend that to people. I always recommend that to people, but there'll be people that will say, oh, I have like this 14-year-old daughter and I feel like she should do DNRS. And it's like, I think that's a very challenging thing to ask for a 14-year-old, but a 14-year-old can probably go hang out with a cool functional neurologist and be doing all these different games that can help rewire their brain in other ways. So
All
it's
right.
not just one way to do it.
Right, because and I'm sorry, Dr. Yeah.
If I could just say, she did the thing with the arm and the functional neurologist, and we think he's great.
Yeah.
He's a great guy, and everything that he did was wonderful. But that and that worked, and that was a kind of rewiring of the brain, although I don't think he really called it that. But that didn't do anything for the she's still
Food and the chemicals. I was with him.
She was working with him, and she was saying, I've got all these other problems too.
And now he refers people to DNRS specifically.
Yeah, no, but Dorothy, can we have a focus retraining versus a general retraining? And couldn't the functional chiropractor have been focused on the functional limitations that she was having with the arm issue and not the more broad retraining that the NRS and some of these other protocols will make available to somebody on the journey?
Yeah, it was just, again, everybody's individual, and it's what their little combination of needs is.
No, but in fairness, yes, we are all bio individuals, but we all have more in common with each other than we don't, right? We are all human beings. We all have, we are 99.9% genetically similar. So, we here at Thick Bootcamp really think there are patterns that you can follow, or formulas that you can follow that will work for you. And I think Rachel, quite frankly, is an example of that. I was reading your book from a formulaic standpoint, right? I've read many other books. For example, I read Bite Me by Ali Hilfiger, and we interviewed Ali at length in the same way that we're interviewing the two of you. And you'd be amazed at how similar your patterns of healing are. So I think there are patterns, Dorothy. I think there are formulas, and I think, within each step of a formula, there has to be flexibility so that it will meet your bio individual and your multi, again, every one of us is going to have a very different, microbiome. Every one of us is going to have a different set of germs spit into us. Every one of us is going to have a different set of emotional experiences that we're going to come to this with our formed brain. But even so, certainly within every step, we have to have some flexibility. But if you look at the people who heal and get better like Rachel, I promise you there's a pattern. There is a pattern. And I saw it in your book, and I saw it very clearly in your book. But before we get there, let me walk back to another piece that I wanted to talk to you about, Rachel, right? Because I did compliment you. About being very religious about every protocol you make. You find a protocol, you believe in the protocol, and you do the protocol, right? And that's not something we always see in this community, right? And one of the things we talk about at Thick Bootcamp is being coachable, right? If you're an athlete, Rachel, I would love you to be my athlete. Why? Because if I told Rachel to do 400 push-ups before she came to practice, and that would make her a better soccer player, Rachel would do 400 push-ups for me, right? That's your personality, right? Well, that's something people in this community need to know, right? Once you find a treatment protocol, you find a doctor, a coach, a treatment protocol that is speaking to your onboard diagnostic system, and your onboard diagnostic system is telling you this is going to work for you, you now must be religious. You must do everything your coach is telling you to do. And then when you get better, or you get to the point where you go, then you find your next coach, or you find your next doctor, or you find your next protocol, but you have to do it. Right. And one of the dangers of this language that we hear in the community about being your own doctor is you now become what I call a cafeteria Catholic, right? Where I like this part of the Bible, I like that part of the Bible, I like this part. No. You're either Catholic or you're not, right? Same thing with the treatment protocol. You either believe in the Rawls protocol or you don't. Do it all or don't do it. You either believe in DNRS or you don't. do it or don't do it, right? So use your onboard diagnostic system, find the coach, the doctor, the treatment that works for you, and then be religious about it. So tell me, Rachel, is that really what you have to do to heal? And is that really one of the important parts of your personality that have allowed you to now get your life back?
Yeah, and I mean, and it's yes, I do believe that. And it's hard because people, like, a lot of the times will reach out and say, like, how do I get my teen to want to do this? Like, how can I do that? And it's like, I don't know how to answer that. My entire life has been that way. That, like, well before I was sick, if someone like my soccer coach said, you do this, if I believed that is an okay thing to do, I would do it. And so it's like, I don't know how to impart that wisdom to other people, but I absolutely believe that is one of the best qualities that make me successful to this day, especially in terms of health, is because, like, as you said, it's not just blindly following someone too. You have to also use your brain. At a certain point, we say, you know what, we're done with this doctor. We're going to go somewhere else. But we do everything, like that mold protocol, to the letter, like every single thing, until eventually I stopped working with him. And then I moved on to my functional neurologist. And, like, we just made the choice that we were in a different place now. And so we stopped mid-treatment doing that, and we moved forward. And so I do believe, and that's how I target all of my stuff. And for DNRS specifically, if you don't put it all in, you're not gonna get anything back.
No, but Rachel, it's everything, right? And again, it's another one of the patterns we saw with you, similar between you and Allie Hilfiger, right? Allie went from doctor to doctor to doctor, right? You went from doctor to doctor to doctor. And it doesn't mean doctor to doctor, it's protocol to protocol, because every single protocol and every single professional and every single coach is going to have their limitation, right? And because they're going to have the limitation, they're going to, let them get you as far as they can get you, but then you move on. But this concept of being your own doctor, in my view, is a dangerous concept. You shouldn't be coming up with the protocol. You should be finding the people who have the protocols that are going to be speaking to you, and you have to be coachable, right? So another one, again, how do you said people are asking you, how do you help people with that? Just the way you just explained it. Be coachable. Be coachable. And if you are coachable, you're going to get a good outcome. And if you're not going to be coachable, and you're always going to be finding, we have to strike this balance, right? I mean, another thing that I just love about, the conversation that you were having with Matt, both you and you, Dorothy, and you, Rachel, is that, you kept saying you have to find the right doctor. I never heard either one of you say, despite saying in many cases, doctors in many cases sucked and they didn't believe me, or they believed me, but they put ceilings on me, or but you still said you need doctors, right? You're not going to be your own doctor. You need doctors. Just keep pivoting until you get to a place, right? So we need to pivot, and we need to be coachable, right?
Yeah, that's
Good
actually,
way of
I was
putting
gonna say,
it.
that's a good way of putting it, because I agree. You can't just be picking and choosing. Oh, well, they said to do these 10 things. I'm going to do this and this. It didn't work. Well, did you do the 10 things exactly how they were laid out? There's a reason. So if you're not going to do it, then find somebody else.
Right.
But,
and that's okay too,
yeah.
right? I mean, that's okay, but you got to do it. So Dorothy, as the mom in this, and again, you should be a proud mom because you have a coachable daughter, right? If I had a baseball team, I'd want 9 Rachels, right? Because I'd win the game. I'd be a brilliant coach because I have 9 kids that can do whatever I tell her to do, right? So, but as a parent, give me your perspective on the importance of teaching your children to be coachable, teaching your children to, once they make a decision, stay with the decision and not take the pieces of it and be, as I was describing, the cafeteria Catholic.
Well, it's interesting when you were saying that, she's like that all the time, in that when she was 13 and 14 and first sick, there were things she didn't want to do. So it's not that she was always coachable, but actually, ultimately she was, ultimately she would take the medicine. But though we had our moments.
But Dorothy, but let's stay with that, because I think it's an important part of the build out. Maybe she wasn't coachable because you weren't using the right protocol, and her onboard diagnostic system was saying, this is not good for me and I'm going to fight it. Maybe that's where we need to be.
Possibly. I could see that. I would use different words than you used, but I mean, in my brain, but there were times when she was really opposed to doing something, and it's like the doctor wants you to do it. Well, there's a scene in there where she just decided she didn't want the PICC line anymore.
Yeah.
And actually, and I had been, really invested in it, like that was going to be the thing that was going to make the difference. And when they pulled that PIC line, they, the doctor just put her, she'd been doing IV antibiotics, but he just sort of changed up her her oral antibiotics. And in a lot of ways, she seemed better. She seemed better in the next couple of, the next couple of months. That's when she started doing her sign language class and things like that. So I have often wondered about that. Was that, some kind of internal intelligence that was just
Absolutely.
telling her, and so, but it can seem like it's your child just being obstinate.
Yeah, and it is, look, and it's one thing to say we're going to believe, the patient. It's another thing to really believe the patient. And I'm not saying this to attack you, Dorothy, but you know what?
Yeah.
But her body was telling her something. She's clearly a strong personality. She
Yeah.
was going to push back, and you were like, well, the doctor's saying this, but
Yeah.
the patient was saying no, and so I think this is an important way of developing this, because it's really hard to strike that balance between as parents, when we're imposing something on our children and when we're not, and when they can really make the decision, and when they can, how do we take input from them? Look, it's hard. This is a terrible disease. So let's.
Well, and I know there were some times when she was taking a zillion supplements, pills, tablets, and I think we have this in the book, that there's just some point where it was like, she just couldn't swallow it. It was
Right.
like her body was, and so we just eliminated all the supplements. She was down to a couple of oral antibiotics, and she did continue to take those. And we just took a little holiday from the others. And then eventually we added some back in, but I think there was a point where we just never got up to that really big number, because it's too much. It's hard for, if you're taking something short term, you can just kind of gut through, but day in and day out, to be doing that, at some point your body rebels, says, I don't want to swallow anything more. And so there is that, there is that kind of dance as a parent, in terms of, if you got a sick child, we're putting our faith in what the doctor suggests. And so, how much do you make somebody do something that they don't want to do? And so
and when do you use that as a signal to pivot to the next doctor?
Yeah.
No,
So-
it's certainly not a science, but it's certainly a cool conversation to have, and something, that I think is beautiful about what you all are passing on to the people who are now going to, to follow the trail that you've blazed. And it's a really powerful and beautiful trail, right? I mean, this book is really, really well written, and it is so deep on so many different levels. I want to talk about another part of the depth of this book, and then I promise we will get to the NRS. And that is, Dorothy, that you very powerfully describe the use of other people and resources and groups as sort of a sounding board for what is going on in Rachel's life, to give you some input into what else you may want to use. So can you build that out for us? How being active, in the Lyme community was vital to shortcutting the process of locating resources to help your daughter heal.
Well, we already mentioned the thing about the mold, in terms of that I had sent that material to somebody and, got an answer back. I do less of this now, but in the early days, I was very involved with the online groups, support groups, because I was just seeking information, and that's where the information was. It was experience. It was the wisdom of the crowd.
Yeah.
And I still see that. One of the things, there's actually a lot of online support groups, but LymeDisease.org sponsors one, and through our website. And I was, I still see things in there where somebody will have what seems like a really weird symptom or reaction or something, and they say, I don't really know what to do about this. And 5 people will chime in and give really good suggestions, even if it's not exactly the same thing. They say, well, you might look at this because such and such, this was my experience. And that is really valuable. That is a really valuable thing. At the same time, I would say you have to take everything, with a grain of salt. Just because something worked for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for somebody else. When I ran for about 8 years, I ran a patient support group in Sacramento. And there were people at that time, there's kind of these fads that come in with treatment. I haven't heard much about it lately, but if you've heard of the SALT-C protocol, you take high amounts of salt and high amounts of vitamin C, and this is supposed to help you. And there's reasons for that. And there's people that say that's terrible. There's people that say it's good. There was a fellow in our support group that said he did the SALT-C protocol, and it was a game changer for him. And he was telling us about it. And so there was a woman in the group who said, I'm going to do that. And she ended up in the hospital. And so, although I think it's valuable to be in a support group, you can't just take something, even if it worked for him.
Not being your own doctor.
Yeah, and so anyway, but I mean, I do think that hearing from somebody's real life experience is good, but you have to take it. You have to take it. You have to know yourself. You have to educate yourself enough that you could listen to that and then say, maybe I'll try that, or I think I'm going to pass on that.
Yeah. So and that's part of what I wanted to build out, Rachel. I think we talked about having medical literacy in order to be able to be successful on this journey. It's one of the patterns we've seen. We've talked about the importance of having social support, but there is a downside to having social support, right? And the downside to social support is A, you may be playing your own doctor, but B, we're going to start now talking about protecting your brain from false beliefs, right? And unfortunately, in many cases, when you're in these groups, you have groups of people who are not feeling very well, who are not necessarily, emotionally healthy. And because they're not feeling well, they're not emotionally healthy. In many cases, I think they're uploading unhealthy things into each other's brains. Rachel, give me your reaction to that, why it may be important to understand, it may be important to be in a social setting with other people with Lyme disease, but also understand not only that you shouldn't be acting as your own doctor, but you're also in a group with a group of people who are not necessarily healthy. And if they may not be emotionally healthy, that part of social literacy requires you to understand that you have to protect your own brain.
Yeah, so for that reason, I am a part of a bunch of groups that I have unfollowed, so none of them show up in my, my news feed on either Instagram or Facebook, because when I began my DNRS journey, I learned about that. I'd never really known. Like, I knew that I would see all these people that were just, offloading all of the hurt from their lives online, and I knew that that didn't make me feel good, but I didn't really have the wherewithal to understand that I didn't need to see that, and that was actually potentially, harming my own brain and ingraining some of those cycles or those pathways in my own brain. So when I started DNRS, I went through every single health and Lyme related website or person, and I just unfollowed. So even like you're still technically friends with them, but it doesn't show up at all. And I've just kept it that way because I was able to learn about how that was really negatively impacting me and my own health by seeing all of that. And so it's a really interesting balance because, like we said, like community is so important, and being able to get information can be so helpful, and to share information from people like me that I can tell you information that might potentially help you when I'm talking about my story. But I also try very hard to explain my own health in a specific way that is hopefully inspiring and hopeful to people, and not just blah on top of them.
So
And
now let's now build out the neurological injury that you suffered, and most people suffer when they are on a Lyme disease journey. Matt certainly suffered, right? So we have a binary brain, right? And our brain is either going to be in the sympathetic expression of our nervous system or the parasympathetic expression of our nervous system, right? Or fight or flight or rest and digest is another way of describing it, right? And because this disease, these microbes are attacking us, our body's under attack, and our brain doesn't know the difference between something that's real or something that we're imagining. It doesn't know something between a lion or a visible to the human eye microbe, right? We just know that we're under attack, right? So your body was under attack from your childhood, and that had an impact on your brain, right? I mean, we always love to talk about neuroplasticity as a great feature of our brain, right? Especially when we're under 25, where we can rewire our brain very, very aggressively. The downside to a neurally plastic brain is that it can be rewired for us in a way that's not necessarily going to serve us, especially when you're under 25, which you were, right? So talk about how these bugs and the experiences that you were having as a result of these bugs, with doctors, with treatment, with all kinds of conflict that was created, how that rewired your brain so that your brain was no longer serving you and you were living all of your life in the sympathetic expression of your nervous system.
yeah, so you hear a lot of times people saying like, oh, I'm always in constant fight or flight. And I'd heard that all the time, and I never really understood that. And I'd had some doctors say, oh, I think you're just always in fight or flight, but I never really understood what that meant or what that could mean for my health moving forward. But yeah, when you have chronic health issues, it impacts every level of you. I mean, like in terms of like doctors and everything, my brain still, even with all my rewiring, instantly you say the word doctor and I'm all of a sudden on edge. And all of a sudden my brain now that I know I'm talking about a doctor, my brain is firing in certain ways because of how it has learned from all of the history that I was trained very well growing up about what doctors could be like in the worst way. And so that set a whole pathway in my brain, so that now when another person who has not had my past, you say something about a doctor, they're sitting there eating their cereal and their brain is not in any way telling them anything. I'm sitting there eating my cereal and then all of a sudden my brain, starts going down a different path. And that was something that I did not know about until starting DNRS. So it's been very eye-opening to be able
So
to.
let's revisit that piece of it, right? So for someone with my experience, you may bring up a doctor, I'm like, wow, they're really wonderful, smart people, have always been kind to me and always been helpful to me, right? That's what my pathway would tell me. Your pathway was doctors are bad. I'm now triggered into overdrive. And then because you are now in fight or flight, right? Now what's happening when you're in fight or flight is that everything is being suppressed, including your immune system, right? Your immune system stops functioning, your digestive system stops functioning, everything stops functioning, right? Because when you're in fight or flight, your body is just focusing on the threat and giving 100% of the energy to protect you from the threat, right? And that's what's happening. And so it's immunosuppressive, right? So then we have the other piece that I do want to build out again in more detail, which is you had doctors who were kind to you, who believed that you were sick, but told you you were going to have to live a life that was not going to be as full as it could be. And you described it really, really beautifully in the book. I want to find that while we're talking about this. And you said, without a doubt, that misguided advice from a particular practitioner who thought she was being helpful had conditioned me to lower the height of my jump. We're going to talk about that in a second. I wish that instead, all those years ago, she had told me that in my future, I would climb mountains, that I would be free from pain, that I would rappel down 200-foot waterfalls, that I would eat foods from different cultures while traveling around the world, that I'd ride a zip line high above the treetops, because that's what was really waiting for me, and that I should be working toward all of that all along, right? I'm crying as I'm reading it, right? Talk to me about how that well-intentioned doctor had also created a pathway in your brain that had to be cleared out before you could get to a place where you are now, and how DNRS was that tool that you had used.
Yes. So, the doctors we've talked about, doing their best to help us, but had instilled or had ingrained this idea, and not just an idea, a full belief that I kept for, the next decade, that I would just, be able to kind of coast by, and you'd have some dips, and then you try to get back to, doing okay again. And that was what I should be striving towards. So that was what my brain was striving towards, to be just doing okay. And for the next 10 years, that is exactly what happened too. It was just, when I was doing, quote, well, I was just getting by. And so that really laid down the framework in my brain to just have that be what I was aiming for. That was the goal, was to just be okay, and to just make do.
So now let's talk about those beliefs, right? Because beliefs are really important here. And because our brain really is two things. It's a search engine and it's a goal-achieving machine, right? And when we set the bar low for ourselves, or we allow somebody to set the bar low for us, what happens is we can now only achieve that which is the bar that has been set for us, right? And once that bar has been set for us, and that's where our neural pathways are, we have to use a tool to clear that out so that we can set a higher bar for ourselves, right? It is a goal-achieving machine. But the other piece of this that I want to talk to you about is how it is a search engine, right? And because what's happening is our senses are receiving a great deal of information, but our brain is narrowing the amount of information we have, and our reticular activation system is only allowing us to see that which it is that we're focusing on, right? So talk to us about how that bar was something that limited not only the goals that your brain were seeking to achieve, but what information you were receiving while you were going through this this journey of healing until you did DNRS.
Well, in terms of the information I was receiving, like you said, you're only kind of able to see what you're focusing on. So I would tune out all of the people or information that would say, oh, no, here's a person with Lyme that's running a marathon. Well, I can't do that because this is how high I can go. And then here's somebody else who's doing this. So it's like you really just filter out all the info. You don't even let it sink in, because that's not in the realm of possibility of what you've been believing. So that was, I think, probably the most interesting part, is that even though you might see all of this information and learn about all of these other stories, and I think a lot of people do that, and then you just kind of filter it out. Well, that's not able to be me, because this little ball is what I've got.
So I do want to thank you for that paragraph, right? And part of the reason I want to thank you for that paragraph is because it was so beautifully written, and it was so powerful to watch you, feel that way, right? But the other reason I wanted to thank you for it is one of the reasons we've been attacked, Matt and I, is that Tick Boot Camp has been called the heal or bust platform, and we've been criticized for that, right? And I was kind of like, for a while, we've been kind of sensitive to that criticism that, are we hurting people by encouraging them to set the bar too high? And, I mean, I was really having doubts about whether or not, our philosophy was right. And then I read that, and I want to show you what I wrote. Wow, wow, wow is what I wrote down there, right? Because that was the most validating thing I had ever read about what we believe, which is no one should be setting a low bar for anyone else, that we should be encouraging everyone to have the outcome that you had described in that paragraph. And we are now firmly back in the heal or bust philosophy because of you, Rachel, because that's what we believe we should be doing as advocates in this community. So thank you. So I want to talk to you about one more thing. You've been with us for many hours, and and as you can tell, I keep you for many more hours. But I want to talk to you about one more thing, which is time, right? Tony Robbins teaches that time is an emotion, right? And I've always thought, that's kind of an interesting perspective on time. And he said, sometimes sometimes time will fly by. Like when you're in a moment where you really love a movie, or you're with people that you really love being with. I have experienced time disappears. And other times it's like, like every minute is a drag, right? So he argues that time is an emotion. And you two actually wrote a book that very powerfully talks about time, right? And being in the past versus the present versus the future, right? And Dorothy, you talked about how important it was never to talk about the future with Rachel when she was at her sickest point. That anytime you tried to talk to her about going to college, or you talked to her about a future, that was triggering to her, and she would behave very aggressively in response to you. And you got to the point where you were just sort of getting through day by day or moment by moment. Talk to us about that piece of how you had to stay present oriented in order to be able to support your daughter at that point, and then how you then were able to pivot over to being more future oriented.
Well, yeah, you ask good questions, Rich. There were times that, maybe we didn't describe as much in the book as we could have, but there were times when she would just fly off the handle. She would just go ballistic. And we were trying to keep things on an even keel. And one of the things that would upset her immeasurably is if you talked too much about the future, someday that you would do something, because she didn't believe she had a future. And we finally figured that out, and we just found that it wasn't, it wasn't productive for us to say, what about college? She was in high school. She was out of the wheelchair before your junior year, I think.
11th grade.
Yeah. So 11th year, but up until that time, it was just that she just thought, this is where, this was her lot in life. And, I realized that there are some people that, if you're in a car accident or any number of things where you might be in a wheelchair for your whole life, and that you can still have a good life. But it's that I had to believe that life would be different for her, that things would get better. But I had to moderate what I said around her about that kind of thing. And it was more like we just had to just deal with today's reality. and so it was, and so I don't know if you want me to go into it. There was one time where she was at school, and this was at the high school, and they were in the library, and they were supposed to be looking up colleges. And she was interested in sign language, and we had talked a little bit about, we were assuming she would go to community college near us. And so she was looking up that in fact, one of the community colleges had quite a program in sign language. And she was looking at that online, and the counselor came over and said, "Oh, don't look at a community college. You want to go to a four-year college," which, is really an asinine thing to say to anybody, and, she didn't know what their personal circumstances were, or financial circumstances,
Right,
or,
right.
any number of other things.
But Dorothy, when I read it, it sounded like a well-intentioned person, like Rachel's well-intentioned doctors who are setting, I mean, look, anytime we're in a position where we're either setting a ceiling for someone or setting a flaw for someone, we're not being good people, right? So in one case, her doctor was setting a ceiling for her. In another case, a doctor was setting a flaw. I mean, a teacher or a guidance counselor was creating a flaw for her, right? We shouldn't be doing that for other people.
Yeah. And so there was, so when she came home, I picked her up from school, and, she was quiet all the way home. And so I just made random conversations about other things. I didn't know what she was upset about. And when we got home, she finally told me about what the counselor had said. And she was very angry and hurt and crying and everything. And I just said, I wasn't sure whether I could say this because I'd always shied away from it. But I said, I just, we have a different picture of things, and that, I envision that, you're going to be walking and she really likes the color green. And I said, you're going to have a little green Volkswagen car, and you're going to go to community college and everything. And I just kind of spun out this little vision. And I didn't know, with experience, she could have gotten very angry with me for saying those things, but she didn't. She was kind of quiet for a while, and then she said, does it have to be a VW?
Well, let's pause there. This is a really important point right now, right? Because the way Rachel described herself up until that point is as crushed, weak, and defeated, right? That's the way you describe yourself in the book, Rachel. And now we have this little step into a place where you're now beginning to have belief. Instead of being present-oriented and focusing on your journaling, and I think there's an upside and a downside of the journaling where you're sort of commemorating everything, your mom allows you to take this step into seeing a brighter future, right? Talk to us about what that taught you and how that was really a vital element of your healing journey.
Well, I remember my mom she really wanted that green VW Bug. So every time when we'd be driving, yeah, she'd be like, there's your future car. And it was, as we said, it was hard for me. I did not ever envision myself being able to drive or being healthy enough to go out and, live that life. But it was always just kind of little things that she'd plant. And it helped me to know that she somehow believed it would get better. And so that was helpful for me.
Right, because the truth is you were not crushed, weak, and defeated, right? Because what you now know from looking at things in retrospect is that you were what?
I was resilient.
Which is the title of the book, right?
Yep, Finding Resilience, which is that the name or the word resilient is important to me because my online presence, I'm resiliently Rachel. And I think that's a really great word. And I think it's also a very true word to who I am. And
Rachel, I'll tell you why I loved it so much. And I really did love that part of the story, which is why I'm so happy with the way your mother just described it, which is one of the personal development experts that I'm studying, one of the OGs, argues that belief is not something that we find. We have belief. It's what we have to do is we have to understand that we have to define the beliefs that are serving us versus the beliefs that are not serving us. But we all have beliefs, right? You had a belief that you were crushed, weak, and defeated. But the truth is you were really resilient, and it was always there. And you needed your mother to give you these little pieces, not overwhelm you, which would make you go crazy, but just give you enough of the little pieces so you can finally see that there was a belief pattern that would serve you. And it was, and then once you saw a belief pattern that would serve you, you saw that the crushed, weak, and defeated belief was a false belief, and you never had it again.
yeah.
Really a beautiful story. I mean, I can't tell you how much I loved reading your book, how much I've loved this conversation. And because you've been with us so long and I wanted to allow you to go back to your day, I am going to let you go because I have so many more questions that I'd ask you. But again, I want to thank both of you for writing this book. It is absolutely beautiful. It is something that we're going to use as a resource, and we're going to encourage people to read and use as a resource for their family. I want to thank you, Dorothy, for all the work that you do for this community. You're a beautiful human being who's just giving more than anyone can ask you to, and the work that you're doing is just unbelievably fantastic. So thank the two of you for everything that you're doing.
Yes, thank you. Rich and Matt, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking with you today, and we just really appreciate the work that you're doing and for having us on.